Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning.
How is this sounding this morning? We're just about ready to get started here. Give me a few more seconds. Alright, well hello everyone. I am here for the first ever live stream on both Twitch and my YouTube channel simultaneously. So we'll see how this goes today. It's a learning experience for me to have things both on YouTube and on Twitch at the same time, and kind of see how it streams. So I figured I was going to be filming this video today anyways. I know I didn't really announce that I was going to be live streaming, but there'll probably be some bumps along the way, so it's okay if you couldn't join me today. I'm going to be working on the how to draw trees and mountains in this headers and icons video that I have been promising you guys for months now, and since I was going to be filming it, I figured I'd live stream it at the same time if anyone can hop on and ask questions and join in. And then I will edit this down as well, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see the edited down version probably in the next day or two as well. But if you have any questions, I'll be a little bit faster to respond on the Twitch stream because it's easier for me to check the chat. So if you're watching on YouTube, maybe head on over to Twitch, check it out, and I can answer questions a little bit faster in the Twitch stream chat room. I will be checking the YouTube periodically, but it's just a little bit more challenging for me. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. Let's switch over so that you can see what I'm working on today. Now, I wasn't expecting this music to be classical. Let's go ahead and skip this song because I am not feeling the classical music. I don't know about you, but it is just not my style. All the music today is from Artlist. I have a license with them, and I chose the travel genre, but what I'm going to do is actually mix out any classical music because that is not me. And if there's any music requests at any time, feel free to chime in. So we're working on this bullet journal project today. The first thing I'm going to talk about is maybe this is not the right music for today. Let's try ambient travel music. Let's see how that goes. That might be a little more chill for drawing. There we go, that's a little better. Hopefully you can hear that okay. It's interesting to hear how the sound sounds for me in the playback, and then for you guys it's a little bit different in the stream. It's not as loud. I'm just going to bring this up just a little bit. Hopefully it's not too annoying for you guys. I'd love to hear any feedback you have on the sound at any point. So if you're having issues hearing me, please let me know. Like I said, I'm new to streaming, so I'm trying to get the microphone right and get the sound right, and sometimes it can be a little challenging. So today I'm going to start off with how to draw trees, and we're going to cover 3 different types of how to draw trees here. And you'll see I'm not being super technical with this page today. I just don't really feel like, normally I'd measure it all out, but I just don't really feel like doing that today. So I'm going to start off talking about your options. Now, your 3 main options are obviously realistic, and then you also have simple and stylized. And what I mean between simple and stylized. So stylized is going to be more like your cartoon trees, your concept art for video game type trees, and simple is more like a graphic style. So icons, things that are very flat, 2D. And the reason why I put them in different categories is because simple trees can still really look like realistic trees, in the sense that they are following some sort of realism and rules of the real world. Whereas stylized trees kind of get a little more crazy, and aren't necessarily something you're actually going to see in the real world, and so that's what I mean by stylized. I am going to be pulling references from Google today, and normally I will give credit to all the photographers. Since I'm just using a Google filter, it's going to be a little bit hard to do that today in a live stream. So just keep in mind, don't pull things from Google and use them in anything that you're going to sell. You know, obviously this is the pet peeve of mine. If you're from my YouTube channel, you'll know I'm very particular about giving copyright where it's due, giving credit where it's due. And so you don't want to steal photographs from the internet and copy them directly unless you're just practicing. For practicing, I personally think it's okay for practicing, but if you're going to sell, don't steal a photographer's work, because a photographer is an artist just like you are, and that's not cool. There are tons of Creative Commons pictures on the internet. I'm going to start today with an angel oak tree because they are my favorite. I lived in Savannah, Georgia for a while, and I just love the angel oak trees. I think they're really beautiful. So I'm going to start off with giving you a realistic version of the angel oak tree. And we're going to start by drawing the trunk. And so some things that you want to keep in mind, I like to start right at the base to kind of give myself a good root system. Sometimes that can be a little challenging. The root systems match trees. So if you don't know that about trees, the root system of a tree is just as big as what you're seeing above ground, which is pretty incredible for some of these angel oak trees. I know that's a little dark on the stream there, but I'm just using, it looks like this is the image of an angel oak. And I believe this is the actually really famous one out of South Carolina. It doesn't say, but it's from the Travel Awaits website. So I started a little big here, so I'm going to have to go over my words a little bit. And that's what I get for not pre-planning my boxes. And I'm just going to really loosely sketch now. If I was actually sketching by myself for myself, I would actually start right with pen, and I'll tell you why. I would start with pen because it forces you to commit to those lines, whereas pencil, you kind of get this kind of sketchy look. But a lot of people really aren't comfortable starting with pen, and so I'm going to use pencil today to show you exactly how you can get started right away drawing and building up your confidence with pencil lines first, and not feeling like you have to commit to something you don't actually like. The most important thing when you're drawing a realistic tree is keeping in mind a couple of things. First of all, even though you're seeing all these branches kind of in a flat 2D form, you're going to think about this tree as a three-dimensional object. So some of the branches, you're going to see the connections here. So they're like this here, you can actually see where that branch meets the trunk of the tree. But for the branches that are in the background, you're not going to see that connection. So be sure to make your lines here and then draw those branches as well. And you're not going to see where they connect to the tree, but that's okay, because that's going to tell the viewer that those branches are in the background on the other side of the tree. Also keep in mind, you don't have to be perfect with your defining lines, because you're going to go back in later and add in shading, and whether that is with a pencil, if you're going to shade it with just graphite, or if you are going to go ahead and use pen and ink and add shading that way, it's all up to you. So whatever you're going to do, just keep in mind that your shading is going to add more of a three-dimensional form to this tree. It's not necessarily going to be all line work, unless you want it to be all line work. Alright, so I'm liking how this oak is turning out here. And this angel oak has a lot of moss on it, so I am going to add a few little lines here to indicate where that moss is, because I think that's really beautiful, and I love moss on trees. And I add a lot of little patterns in with my line work in pen when I go back through. So today, for my illustration, I am going to be going back through with pen and then with watercolors on top of that. So I'm going to show you my process from start to finish for this. You do not have to use watercolors. You don't have to use pen. You can keep it all pencil. You can keep it all simple. You can keep it just black and white, whatever feels comfortable for you. But just keep that in mind. So I'm just doing the line work all here, and I'm not going to do any shading in graphite. Actually, I will show you here. I'll do a little shading just to show you kind of, if you're new to shading, the most important thing to get right off the bat is to focus on highlights and shadows. And there's a wide range of values between those highlights and shadows. But if you can get your shadows really nice and your highlights really nice, that'll already start to give you a three-dimensional form. And there's all sorts of exercises that might be a little bit easier than a tree, like doing the globes or cubes and things like that, and playing around with light and looking at still lives, which can get kind of boring. I don't like doing still lives. I like pulling from life, but it is a little bit harder. So for this particular picture, there's actually not a ton of strong highlights or shadows. There's a little bit though. And so what I like to do, and I'm going to look very silly doing this, is I like to squint, and I look at the image, and when I'm in real life, it's much easier in real life when you're drawing from life rather than drawing from pictures. But that's not always possible for everyone. So I like to squint, and I can immediately see when I'm squinting at this photo where my highlights are. So obviously it's going to be hard for you to do on the stream because the picture is kind of dark. But whatever picture that you decide to use for your tree, just go ahead and take a squint at it. And when you do that, your eyes lose the light around you, and just like a camera, if it doesn't have enough light, you're going to lose those depths of values, and you're going to immediately see highlights and shadows more prominently. Oh, thank you so much for letting me know about my audio. I was worried about that. Is it too high or too low? I'm having a hard time with it this morning. I really appreciate that being this around. Scratchy and echoey. Alright. Let me see if I can switch over to a different. How does this sound? Does this sound a little bit better? Well, that's interesting. I'm going to cut the music so that I can focus on my audio here. Any better yet? How's this? Is that sounding a little bit more clear? And thank you again so much. I really, really appreciate it, because it's so hard to get feedback when I don't have anybody I know watching the stream. So thank you. What a bummer. I don't understand what's happening this morning. I'm wondering if it's my connection. Alright. One more. Oh, that's giving me nothing at all. Can you hear me now? Oh, what a bummer. How about now? Can you hear me a little bit better now? I'm hoping that's coming through a little bit clearer. I switched over from default to back to the headset. I don't know what could be causing an echo today. And just a heads up for anyone who's watching, I'm going to go ahead and click on speakers. There might be a little bit of feedback. So if I'm testing out my audio and I get a little, I can see what you're saying about scratchy noise. I wonder if it's cord being coiled. Actually, let's try this. I was in the zone, but that's okay. I appreciate you giving me feedback because the sound is super important when you're filming a tutorial. Still kind of scratchy. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. That's kind of low now. Alright. Let's try unplugging this. And see if that reduces the scratchiness. No, still scratching. It must be my internet connection today, which is kind of a bummer. Alright, how about that? Has the echo gone away? Because it might have been from my speakers. Oh, fascinating. You can tell I'm a video person. I am not an audio person. This is always a challenge when I am trying to figure out the audio. Let's see. The only thing I can think of is it's picking up kind of the fan from my computer, which is kind of loud. What else could be causing an interference? I think it's my phone. I wouldn't guess. I know sometimes the phones can cause a little bit of feedback. Let me see if I plug it in if I can hear a little bit better. So if I'm talking, I don't know. How about if I lower the decibels? Nope. Yeah, and nothing has changed since last night, so I don't know what's going on. It makes me think that something is not plugged in correctly. Alright, let's test this. Nothing. Okay, thank you. I apologize for anyone who's just joining in. I'm having some audio issues this morning. I would like to try to get them fixed before we get started, because I've got a lot of information to do today. So I'm just looking up. See if this fixes the issue at all. Nope. I told you there'd be bumps in the live stream. It's all part of figuring out my audio and getting it to be the best that it can be. Oh, I may have figured it out. I may have got it. Let's see. Let's see if this was it. Is there any clicking now? Oh, it sounds so much better. I think I got it. All right. Yes, so I will bump that up again. And so now I should be loud and clear. Sound loud and clear to everyone? Yay! Awesome! Thanks again, Big Mr. Brown, so much for bearing with me and helping me out. So I figured it out. I had the audio turned on 2 different cameras at the same time, and so it was interfering with each other. I am so excited. All right, so I'm going to turn the music back on a little bit because I like to have the music on while I'm marking. And let's see if we can go ahead and get back in the groove here. So I was talking about... Skip that song. What was I talking about? I was talking about... yes, squinting. So when you're looking at an image, talking about values. So whether you're drawing from life or whether you are drawing from an image, if you squint your eyes, it helps you to see the highlights and the shadows in a higher contrast because your eyes are taking in less light. So when I do that with this tree, I see that there's some highlights around the knots here. There's highlights right here, which I'm obviously not going to draw because then it wouldn't be a highlight. But what I'm going to do to make that highlight pop is I'm actually going to draw on the other side of that line and add the shading in on the other side, which would be a shadow. And that shadow next to that highlight makes the highlight pop rather than drawing the highlight. Hopefully that makes sense. And so that's how I would do it if I was doing the whole tree. Now, like I said earlier, I am going to be doing pen and then watercolor for my shading, so I'm not going to do fully rendered graphite drawing here. But if you were going to do graphite and just stick with the pencil for now, that is how you would render it out. Just squint and see where your highlights are, and then see where your shadows are, and draw the shadows, not the highlights. Okay. So, now for leaves. When you're being realistic with a realistic tree, there are a couple of different options that you can do when you're doing realism. Now, you could sit there and draw every single leaf, And some artists do choose to do that. I've seen now, I have a few people who did join on YouTube. I apologize for any sound issues I had earlier. If you're watching on YouTube, I see there's like Honey and Sweet Potato and The Real 273. Hello, hi, hello, thank you for tuning in today. I appreciate it. I apologize for the audio issues earlier. So if you have any questions, I am a little bit slow to respond to the chat on YouTube because I see it after I see the Twitch chat. So if you want to join the Twitch chat, I'll be a little bit faster to respond to any questions. So when you're doing a realistic tree, you have two options. I actually use more than two options. You could draw every leaf, but that's very time consuming. And I've actually found that unless your style is to draw every single little detail in a scene, which there are artists who do that, but it can be a little overwhelming for the viewer because as somebody who's viewing the world, your eye really doesn't pick up on every single leaf. When you're looking at a tree, and I'm looking out my window here, and there's absolutely no leaves on my tree because it's winter time here, and I'm up in the northern hemisphere, so no leaves on my trees. But when you're looking at trees, your eye does not process every single leaf. It's just too much information for your eye to process, unless you focus on, like, hey, this branch has 20 leaves on it. So I recommend kind of doing a mix. What I mean by that is any of the branches that are kind of receding in the background, you kind of group those leaves together to create a shape. Now, the angel oak doesn't have a thick foliage, so you can actually see the sky through it pretty well. And a lot of this I'm going to be handling with color, but I'm just showing you very quickly how you could possibly handle this with graphite as well. So if I was doing this all in graphite, I would get the general shape of the back leaves, and then I would shade that in. Then I would go back on top and do my individual leaves that are going to be in the foreground. And I'll show you this close up so that you can get a better idea of how that looks in just a minute. Now, if you were doing a full graphite rendering, I would actually render out all these little leaves. But I'm going to keep it kind of simple and just do some little leaf shapes. And then behind that would be more graphite. So let's go ahead and hold this up so you can see it a little bit better here. So the graphite is in the background with the shading, and then the leaves are little highlights, the little white dots on top. So that's one way that you can make that look. I'm going to erase that because that's not necessarily what I like to do. And like I said, I'm going to go back in with pen and watercolor later, so that's what I'm going to use on mine. Alright, so let's pick a different tree so you can get an idea. I'm going to do a pine tree. We have lots of those up here in the north. And there's so many different pine trees. I'm actually going to pull up... No, I'm not going to do that. Never mind. I don't want to take from another artist. I was going to pull up an illustration to kind of show you the different types that you can do, but I don't want to pull up another artist's work without giving proper credit. So I'm going to pull up this pine tree. And I'm not paying attention to my other filming, because I'm trying to film on my DSLR at the same time. So, for this pine tree, so obviously this is a stock image. There's lots of high contrast, which might actually be good. If you're just getting started, stock images could potentially help you to be able to see the shadows and the highlights better because it's going to have a high quality contrast and there's not going to be any conflicting background. The trouble with using stock footage is because there is no background, you don't have any lighting context. So you don't have the context of where the sun is in the sky and how the environment is affecting the color of that tree. So it could throw you off a little bit, but we're just drawing simply here today, so I think a stock image is fine. For this particular pine tree, to draw it more realistically, I would do this. I would do the individual pines, and I would actually start at the top instead of the bottom, unlike the angel oak. And I've got to write angel oak here, which I'm going to do right now because I don't want to forget which tree is which. And I am not super good at remembering all the different tree types, but so I would do the individual pines here right at the top. And then as you get further down, I actually would make them more like shapes rather than, that was a little bit too much for that branch. Make them like blocks of shapes rather than doing the individual pines. And we'll go back later and we'll add a little bit more detail. It's going to look really rough first. But then you're going to go in and add a little bit more shading and a little bit more detail to it as you go along. And then your trunk. I'm going to go back in and determine where you're going to see that trunk. Now in this one you don't see the trunk all that much. For this drawing I really do kind of want to show a little bit more of the trunk. I'm going to say that the trunk is going to appear here and here. And obviously for this technique I'm keeping it all in graphite, but I will show you how to do this in watercolors as well, right next to it. Alright, so now I'm going to go in and start defining this a little bit more. And I'm going to add another layer that kind of adds in these little pine needles. This is kind of a little Charlie Brown tree with how little there's pine needles at the top here. On my drawing, not on the actual stock footage. Stock footage is a nice full tree, but I'm trying to illustrate a concept here. I need to fill it in just a little bit more. Probably a little less trunk will help to make that feel a little bit more like a full tree and less like a Charlie Brown tree. Some of you may not understand that reference if you've never seen Charlie Brown's Christmas, but Charlie Brown tree is a sad tree that does not have a lot of branches. It has a lot of bare spots. We don't want to draw that. We want to draw a little bit more of a full tree. So you'll see here I started with the general shape and I'm adding in the little pine needles here to add a little bit more detail. But overall, nothing super difficult here. For continuity's sake, I'm going to go ahead and keep doing this. And filling this in. And this would be a little bit easier. I probably should have pulled out one of my graphite pencils. I love using a mechanical pencil for line work. It works really beautifully for clean, crisp lines. But if you're doing something like this, you actually should be using more of a traditional pencil, or even a graphite pencil that has less, what is the word for that? Less of the wood piece that's around here. So it's pure graphite stick. I believe it's what it's called, pure graphite pencil, something like that. That then you could get this really nice shading like this with the side of your pencil. Maybe after I take a break, because I'm going to finish this sheet and I'm going to take a little bit of a break today, I'll pull out some of my pencils and I'll come back to that so that you can see the difference. So you can see here it's really starting to take shape. I'm going to fill this in completely on the bottom because I want it to feel really full on the bottom of the tree. So I made it a little bit more open than the stock footage, and I'm just doing that from my own mind, thinking of what pine trees look like, which you can do too. You don't always have to follow the image that you find. The image can spark inspiration. It doesn't have to be perfect. It could have, but I think it's actually probably a spam phone call. I've been getting tons of spam phone calls lately during the day. Kind of ridiculous. I don't know who stole my phone number down the line, but somebody did. Alright, so I think that's looking pretty good. And you can even make this trunk a little bit longer. So it sits on the, we'll make them all sit on the same horizon line for continuity's sake. How about that? Alright, I'm going to try to draw something that's not in the northern hemisphere. I want to try to be a little bit more inclusive in my videos because I tend to pull a lot from what I know where I am, but everyone has different trees. Actually, you know what? I will pull a palm tree first. That's pretty common in a lot of places in the United States, in the south and the west coast. Let's see what we can find. I want to pull something with some actual environment, so this might work really nicely. I have no idea how to pronounce that tree correctly, but it looks like it is a coconut tree. palm tree. That must be maybe the scientific name, maybe. I am not even going to try to take a stab at that because I will butcher it. So I've got a palm tree here. Alright, so for this one, I am going to start with the trunk. It might be, if you're used to drawing palm trees, it might be a little bit easier to start with the top, but I don't know exactly where I want my palms to kind of hang, and so I'm going to start with the trunk here and kind of get that down first. I'm going to tilt this up, which I apologize, you probably won't be able to see it, but it allows me to see it a little bit better. And I'm not familiar with drawing palm trees, but I want to, like I said, be a little bit more inclusive of other plants and trees along the lines. So for a palm tree, this is a case unlike what I did with the angel oak, where I think it actually would be a good idea to draw more details for a palm tree. Maybe that's just because I'm not familiar with palm trees so much, and so for me the details are important, but I think that the lines here are really important for a palm tree to get that essence of what the palm leaves do. And what I would suggest doing for a realistic one is to actually go through and do all these little lines here so that you can get the movement of the tree. Because when I have seen them, they're so cool to watch in the wind. I don't know if you've ever watched a palm tree in the wind, but they move so beautifully, and the leaves are so integrated into the branches that they're just so different than other trees and the way they interact with each other. They also do these like really curved lines. You'll see this one across the top. So it's almost like you have to think about that branch of that big huge leaf as almost like a spine would be. And so the movement, so I'm going to fall back on a little bit of my animation training here, which is a little bit different than a traditional drawing person would have. When I think of drawing something, I think of the movement that it has. And so when something moves, and this is an animation principle, so I'm just doing this back and forth. My hand movement, because I'm relaxed, is following the movement of my wrist. So the wrist moves, the hand follows. And obviously I can change that and control that because I'm a human and these are my joints. But in nature, that spine is going to control where the needles go. And so if this is blowing in the wind, the leaves are going to spiral around it and follow the wind. And then if the wind's going crossways like I was just doing, when the spine snaps like that, the leaves are going to be going this way and then they're going to snap that way. Hopefully that makes sense. It's been a long time, and I actually usually don't explain animation principles in my drawing videos, but essentially what I'm trying to say is it looks like this branch is blowing in this direction, which is causing the needles to kind of fly back like this. Again, that's something that you would be able to tell better if you were drawing in person, and I highly recommend you try to draw in person because it really tells a whole nother story, a whole nother layer to your drawing. One of my favorite things to do is to actually go to a zoo, and I will plan to spend the whole day at a zoo, and I will just draw animals all day long. And it's funny, I'll get people who will come up to me. There's actually two responses that I get when I'm drawing, and that is, first they will come up and they expect it to be bad for some reason, and then they'll see my drawing and they'll act surprised, like, oh wow, that's actually really good. And so I get that a lot. For some reason I look like I can't draw first, but and then they'll follow that up with, are you in school? Which I'm not anymore, although I used to be in art school, and so I will be a little bit more I explain that I'm not, but I'm a professional artist and I have to keep practicing always. If I want to keep getting better at drawing, you just have to keep practicing. I actually don't really like how this is turning out, but we're going to keep rolling with it for the sake of this video. But you can tell that I'm much more comfortable drawing things that I know and I'm familiar with than I am drawing something that I'm not so familiar with. And that's just because it comes with practice and So anyways, the other thing that I get when I'm drawing at the zoo is I actually get a lot of people who are like, why don't you just take a picture, it'll be faster. And quite honestly, I'll be honest with you, before I went to art school, I felt the same way. I was like, why would I waste 45 minutes of my time sitting in front of this animal drawing it when I could just take a picture and sit in the comfort of my home on my couch and draw it from there? And I'll tell you why. Because when you're looking at an image, you're looking at the camera, well, the photographer and the camera's interpretation of that thing. And the camera flattens everything. So if you are always drawing from pictures, it's going to be very difficult for you to build the skill of making that drawing look like it is in a three-dimensional form. Because you're not drawing it from a three-dimensional form, you're drawing it from a two-dimensional form. Also, kind of like what I just said, the way the leaves move and the way the branches interact with each other is really, it tells a story. It allows you to see how things move, and especially with animals and people. If you do not capture that movement, your drawings are going to feel very stiff. And you'll see that a lot with high schoolers when they're drawing. Their people and their characters always look kind of disjointed or stiff, and they don't look like they're actual people who are relaxing and moving and articulating their joints and things. And so it's very important to draw from life. And I was, like I said, I'll admit, I was very resistant to that when I first started drawing. I just did not want to do that at all. I was like so resistant. And then when I actually was like, fine, I'll do this, I have to do it for class, that's when I started to actually really see a difference in my drawing and an improvement in my skill, was because I took the time to really focus on drawing from life. Alright, let's pick one more tree. I was only going to do 3, but we got a little bit of space here. I am like not following any sort of line today. That's okay. We're just going to roll with it. I think it's called the Bevoa tree. I want to say this is out of Africa. Africa and Australia. Madagascar. Okay, so I think these trees are really cool. Personally, I've never seen them in real life. I would have loved to see them in real life, and hopefully it is on my list of things to have seen. They are the coolest freaking trees. Alright, so I'm going to pull this up. I don't know if I'll have any viewers from this area, but it's something that's different and challenging because it's something that's new to me, and so I can show you how I would interpret something that wouldn't necessarily be something that I'm super used to drawing. So, for this tree, I would go ahead, the trunk is very strong, very thick. So I am going to go ahead and start with the trunk here to determine how tall this is going to be. Now in real life, these are obviously not drawn to scale. The angel oak would be way bigger than the pine, the palm tree would be way taller than the pine, but I'm just kind of drawing them each to scale of this box. But in real life, this tree would dominate over these ones. They're very, very, very big, very, very tall. And I'm just going to go ahead, and it looks like there's actually not too many receding branches, kind of like I was talking about here. You have the foreground branches and then the receding branches. In this image that I chose, there really isn't that many. There's one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this arch here. And then I'm going to make this in front here. And I'm not going to draw over this, so I'm just going to pretend like it ends there. And then the receding branch would be here. And that line is a strong line because this is a receding branch, meaning it attaches to the back side of this, so we don't see where it attaches. And another receding branch right here as well. Now for this particular tree, rather than drawing the individual or drawing shapes like this, I'm going to make it one solid shape here. And I'm going to go back in with pen and really fill in the details on this particular one after. But I'm going to make it one solid shape because that is what speaks to me. And I can make it look more realistic in the color phase, because this is starting to look a little cartoony, right? But we can fix that. We can make it more realistic later. If you were drawing just in pencil and you didn't feel like you were drawing in pen or in color later, then what I would recommend is kind of like this. You would go in and make just little hash marks, kind of really close together like this. So you create the illusion of leaves, because you really can't see, even if you zoom in on this image, which is a high quality image, you really can't see the individual leaves because they're so far away from the viewer. And these trees are so incredibly tall, you really have to have a really close-up telephoto lens to be able to capture all those leaves. Alright, so that's kind of what I would do if I was doing graphite. I'm going to erase that so I don't ink that later. Alright, so we've got our 4 realistic trees. Now I'm going to take these and I'm going to simplify them. And I might have to pull up the references again. I probably should have saved them in other tabs, but oh well. We'll roll with it. So, I'm going to do simple first and then stylized, and if you just joined in, basically what I mean by simple is I'm going to break these down into basic shapes. And so I'm still going to be following the realism of the tree, of what I know to be true about these trees, but it's going to be in a simple form. So, for the angel oak, obviously the trunk is still very prominent. When I'm breaking them down in simple form, I am still doing some of those receding branches that we talked about a couple of times now. So you've got your branches in the front, and I'm kind of spitballing here because I'm not following, oops, that's way too thick. I'm not following the image anymore. If you are new to this, I would suggest you do follow an image when you're practicing, because it will make a better final product, it'll make a better result. I'm just trying to illustrate a concept here, not necessarily make an illustration that I'm going to be selling. And I do want to mention, I don't mention it all that often, which I probably should, it's bad of me, but I do have a mailing list. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's linked in my channel. I don't have it linked on Twitch yet, but if you go to my website, Artist Explores the World, you can sign up for my mailing list, and you get free printables. So what I make today will be scanned, I'll clean it up, and then it's free to you, to your inbox, and every single month you get a new one in your email box. So if that's something that's interesting to you, if you're trying to learn how to draw, hello, person bored on YouTube, just popping in to say hello. Thanks so much for popping in and saying hi. So I'm working on this angel oak tree. Oh, look at me, I didn't finish writing the tree name. So bad, so bad. Anyways, alright, if I'm going to simplify the leaves, sort of similar to what I did here, I'm going to keep the basic shape. So I'm going to go through, and you'll notice I'm going darker on this one, and that is because I know I'm going to be inking these lines. And so I'm fine with going darker and not keeping them light, because I'm committing to these lines. And again, I am repeating myself a little bit, but I am pretty confident in my line work. That may not come naturally to you, and that's okay. If you need to go more sketchy, feel free to go more sketchy with your style, but I'm going to fill in these blocky shapes. And the reason I'm doing that is I want the sky to show through. So we talked about how the angel oak has a lot of sky showing through, so I'm leaving these blocks. And it kind of doesn't make a ton of sense right now, but it'll make a lot of sense when I ink it and color it. But what I plan to do is the inside of this shape is going to be a solid color, and then these blocky shapes that I'm making are actually going to be the sky that's showing through the leaves. So it's all one solid shape, and it's got texture to it because it's got holes in it. But it's simple because it is one solid shape, and you're not seeing the individual leaves at all. I'm not trying to show any individuality. If I was trying to show individual leaves, I would still do the main base, the huge blocky shape, and then I would add little tiny leaves off on the edge, kind of floating. I would let your mind fill in the blanks. So if you see floating leaves like that, and they follow the form, they follow the branch form, you don't need to see the leaves attaching to the branches, because your mind will automatically go, oh, I just can't see the branches, but those leaves are attached to the tree. And this is usually the case. The mind really fills in a lot of the blanks, and so when you're drawing, you don't have to be hyper-realistic for the mind to realize kind of what that image is supposed to be. Alright, I think I got enough of that done. I'll go back in with pen and add more, flesh that out a little bit more in pen, but I don't feel necessary to do it in graphite. You may feel like you have to draw everything in pencil first. Totally cool if you need to do that. Alright, pine tree. So pine trees, simplified pine trees, one of my favorite things to do. I know if Big Mr. Brown's still here, he was watching me do lots of little pine trees last night when I was wood burning. I do a ton of pine trees in my work because I'm familiar with them. There's a lot of them where I live. So, simplified pine trees, super easy to do. All you have to do is just get the general shape of the tree that you want, and then just do it in tiers, Christmas tree style. And once you get your general tier shape done, because this obviously looks a little bit cartoony, and we don't want that, then you can go in and kind of add your individual pine needles here. So you're still getting that furry feel to the bottom edge. Sometimes these can almost look like fur, or like it makes me think of like that heartbeat monitor. Like when you get a heartbeat and you can go up and down and go through those lines. And I realized I forgot to hold this close to the camera again. I'm going to hold this up once I finish this tree so that you can see these a little bit closer, because I know sometimes the clarity on these cameras is not always the best. Alright, so let me hold this up so you get a little better, closer idea of what we've been doing here. Let's see. A little bit further. Alright, so we've got the angel oak, the pine tree, the palm tree, and then the baboa tree at the end here. Alright, and then the simplified version of the angel oak and then the pine. So that's where we're at right now. I'm going to keep moving forward. So for the palm tree, let's see, this is actually a little bit challenging for me because it's something I haven't done before. So what I would do to tackle this and make it a little bit more simplified, keep the trunk very simple, like that. And then treat the leaf as if it was all one piece, even though we know it has all these little individual needles coming off of it. I would still draw the center line because you know that all of the leaves are going to follow that central line. And then what I would do is kind of something like this, which looks kind of cartoony, and I kind of want to fix that because it looks a little bit too stylized for what I want to go for. So instead, I'm going to make these a little bit deeper, like that. So it's a little bit more realistic, not so cartoony. Because that's what we're going to do last. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. Then fill these in. That was a little too low. Fill these in, and then do the deeper waves here. Another option that I didn't talk about for this tree that I have seen some artists do, I just thought of it, is you could also, and again, this would be something where you really want to use a graphite pencil, not necessarily the, I just realized I'm totally not filming on my DSLR. Oops, hopefully people are watching the live stream because the remix of this is not going to be totally solid. That's alright. So what I've seen artists do is do the main spine of the leaf, and then do shading like this. I just remembered that. And that might be a faster way to draw these palm trees without doing all the individual needles. And that's another option. I'm killing my mechanical pencil doing this because it's smushing the end, but if you have a graphite pencil, that might be the better option. Alright. I'm going to keep going with this. Try to finish this off a little bit quicker because I am going to ink it a little later. I'm going to just do the spines here. Alright. And then lastly, for the Baboa tree, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, this is actually pretty simple already, but I'd make it even more simple. Massive trunk here. I'd make it even more simple by not doing as many background branches. Just really focus on the shape of these foreground trunks and branches. And I actually did an illustration with these, probably about 3 years ago, where I did, actually, you know what, I'll draw that for the stylized. I'll do that because then I'm already comfortable with it. And then I would emphasize, even though I'm not emphasizing the receding branches, I would emphasize at least 2 layers of leaves in this particular case, so that gives the illusion that there is more to the tree, that it's not a flat 2D object. Alright, so those are looking pretty good. Now we're going to talk about stylized. So stylized can mean a whole bunch of things, especially depending on what your particular style is. And so it's just really going to depend on what you want to do. I lean more towards concept art, fun, cartoony, simple style. I love trying to take real trees and turn them into something you would see concept art for video games. That's just what I like to do. There's so many different ways you can do this. What I would start with doing, if you're trying to experiment with stylization, is once you feel confident about the particular trees that you're drawing, I would then try to pick a genre. And what I mean by that is pick a particular video game, or pick a particular cartoon or movie, or animated strip, a comic strip, cartoon strip, or if you have a webtoon, if you have a favorite graphic webtoon that you look at. I like War Olympus. You try to take the tree that you have and draw it in that style. And this can take a lot of time, a lot of practice, a lot of trial and error. And then that way you can try to experiment with different styles. And you may have seen some artists do this with portraits. When they're trying to get good at drawing multiple styles, they'll do like those grids, and they'll draw the same character as, so this character as a Peanuts character, this character as a Disney princess, this character as, and then continue on and on with all these different genres that they're trying to practice. So you have the same common theme, but you're drawing it in different styles. Eventually, over time, you'll start to find you have your own style, and you won't need to copy other people unless that becomes your job. And if you're a concept artist, that is going to be your job, because concept artists have to mimic other people's styles. Alright, looks like we're out on the ambient travel music. Let's see what we get for ambient documentary. Let's see what that brings up. Okay. Just checking my live streams here, making sure if anyone has comments. Looking pretty quiet, but that's okay. Got my stream going here on my DSLR, so let's go ahead and move along to stylized. So, how do I want to do this? I think for the angel oak, I'm going to really emphasize even larger than life trunk. And then I'm going to make the branches move more dramatically. I don't have a ton of space to do this, but we'll see how it goes. So when I look at an angel oak tree, for me the branches are just so amazing. They look like chairs and seats. It doesn't even look like a tree sometimes. And I saw a lot of those when I lived in Savannah, Georgia. And they're also in Southern South Carolina. I think they extend out into Alabama and Mississippi as well. That branch is a little too thick. But I'm just trying to get more playful with these. They almost look like squiggly noodles, but I still want them to have some substance to them. I don't want them to be totally off. So the reason why I had to make that branch smaller is the trunk has to be the thickest part of the tree that is the support system. So even though this isn't trying to be realistic, you still gotta try to follow some values of gravity and things like that for people to be able to believe this is a real thing. And I'm gonna make this kind of like a spotted tree, and I'm gonna take the moss that we talked about at the very beginning on that tree and make it kind of like blobs and spots that are going to show up on this tree. Let's see, what do I feel like doing for the leaves? I think for this particular tree, I'm going to go ahead and do just circles. Actually, I take that back. That was a little too clean for what I think an angel oak really is, because a lot of times you get that. Oh, you know what? I'm going to add some Spanish moss. If you've never seen Spanish moss. Hello, Sudex. Thank you for joining the stream. If you have any questions, I am currently working on a stylized version of an angel oak, and I appreciate you popping in to say hi. So I'm going to use this chance to put in some Spanish moss. If you've never seen it, definitely look it up. It's very predominant in Savannah. It actually is technically an invasive species. It's not great for the trees. It was brought over by the Spanish, I believe, which is why it's called Spanish moss, if I can remember correctly, when they came over on their ships. Man, I can't. That's pulling history from a long time ago, so I don't know. Don't quote me on that. It's been a long time since I've lived in Savannah and gone on a historical tour, but it creates this almost like mystical feel to the trees. So I'm just going to add a little bit in there, even though it wasn't present on our original drawing. And this is just where you can have a lot of fun. You can take that realistic work that you did and use it as a base to have fun and play around. I don't want to get too strung up on the details here because like I said, I need to ink this and then color it, so I don't want to be here all day. But, alright, what am I going to do? I'm not going to do the perfect circles. I'm actually going to do squiggly circles like this. That, I think, will look better. And will still allow me to have portions of the sky showing through. Alright. So I'm only going to do that there. I'm going to do it on the rest of it when I ink it. But I don't see the point in doing it with just a pencil. Alright. Let's try the pine. What are we going to do with the pine today? So I did kind of two different types of pine here. Let's see. I think I'm going to break it down into sections. Maybe almost like a Dr. Seuss looking thing. So I'm going to go ahead and break it down so that you can see. I'm going to make it a little bit more curved and then make it so you can see the trunk in the middle. It's a lot more curvy, not quite on base there. I'm going to draw the trunk first so I follow this correctly. So that was kind of imbalanced, so I just tried to fix it here. I'm going to draw the trunk straight through and then I'll erase it after on the part. And that way I know my center line needs to be here, which will make it a little bit easier for while again, still making it sorta based in reality. Sorta. And I'm definitely going to do really interesting bark texture on this. I'm just making lines here to let myself know that I want to do that bark texture. You know, this is actually coming out looking like a bush that I saw in South Korea when I was there. There's this tree that actually looks partitioned off like this. I think they actually cut it to be that way, and it grows wild in all different directions. They shape them really nicely. I'm trying to think of where that was. I think it might have been in the one of the memorials there. Alright. So that's kind of a simplified version there that I'm pretty happy with. Oh, see, I got a little bit off screen there. Apologize for that. Started drawing a little bit too closer to myself. So I'll go ahead and hold this up so that you can see it a little bit better. So that's looking kind of good. I'm pretty happy with the stylization of that. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the palm tree, and I am going to stick just to the traditional cartoony style of a palm tree that I started to draw before I started adding in more needles up here, just because I'm very familiar with this and can draw it pretty quickly. And I do want to speed up the stream just slightly. We've got a lot to talk about today, so for this one, going for the standard cartoony style of a palm tree. And even though our tree did not have coconuts in it, I'm going to add some coconuts here. And so very stylized, very cartoony, not realistic at all. And in this case, I am going to draw the spines after, and that's just because it's easier to do that, rather than to uniformly draw this shape following a spine. Alright, super stylized there. Didn't give myself a ton of room for the boa tree, so I'm actually might come down just a little bit and put those on the same horizon line. And then put this right in the front here. Alright. So we're gonna take, hi, KH, is that Chloe? Is another way of spelling Chloe? Thanks so much, I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, let me know. We've worked through realism and then a simplified version of these 4 trees, and now I'm working through a stylized version of each of the trees. Alright, so I did kind of go very stylized for this. What I think I'm going to do is do the dots that I was going to do here. So, I'm going to bring that boa tree, I really should learn how to say that properly, all the way down here, and I'm going to make the branches even smaller to really emphasize how big that trunk is, because I love it. I think it's fun, it's different, it's unique to me. I'm not used to seeing these trees. They aren't everyday trees for me. And I think the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to emphasize a spiral on this one. And I'm going to create a different texture on this tree. I'm going to use some dots, which if you are familiar with my work, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably more familiar with my work. I do lots of lines, unnecessary lines and dots. That's just my personal style. I really love it. I think it adds a little bit of flair and it's a lot of fun for me. Totally unnecessary, but just kind of has been something I've done since I was little, actually. And I love it. Alright, so I'm going to start by doing some bigger circles here, just to kind of fill in the space. And then I'm going to progressively get smaller and smaller with my circles as I fill in the space. And so now we have taken this tree, all 4 of these trees, all the way from realistic into more simplified, but still following some sort of realism, to complete forms of stylized drawing. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see it closer. a little bit better, those final four. See if I can get it to focus. There we go. You can see those final four stylized versions of the original realistic trees that we did. So I think this is looking pretty good. I'll just take a look here. I'm going to stop for just a second to take a look at the chat. Just see if you guys have any questions. It doesn't look like it. Thank you so much to those of you that are tuning in. So I feel like this is pretty solid. I've got a pretty good idea here. I've got a little bit of wasted space, but maybe I'll use this to write a few notes in. And then, like I said, I will scan this in. We're going to do the pen and ink, and we're going to do the color. But I'm going to switch over to mountains first. We're going to draw our mountains because we're focusing on trees and mountains today. Maybe I'll add a few little notes here, scan these in when they're finished, and then if you join my mailing list, you can get a free download of these this month. Alright, let's switch gears here. We're going to switch over to mountains. I just want to make sure I'm using the right side of the paper. And I am using, if you're curious, I'm using a cardstock paper. This is just a simple, I actually believe this is from Staples, and I believe it is the resume paper. It's a thicker, heavyweight paper. It can really take abuse, and you'll see later when I go back and I do ink and then I do watercolor on top of this that it can handle most watercolor. If you get really heavy with the water, then it starts to buckle, but it's a pretty solid paper. Alright, so just like I did with the trees, we're going to start with more realistic looking, which I will admit is probably going to be really hard for me. I don't do a lot of realistic mountains. I do more simple mountains, ones that look realistic but are broken down more into simplified shapes, and then we'll take those into stylization, stylized mountains. Okay, so that's the goal. Put those aside. And I'm going to pull up some realistic mountains. Let's see what we can come up with here. I'm going to start off with the Rocky Mountains. I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Rocky Mountain National Park, but it is beautiful. It's such an amazing place to visit, and the mountains are completely stunning. So I'm going to pull this up. Oh, it came up in maps. It's not going to help me very much when we're looking for images. Okay. And we'll do this very popular mountain range here. And actually, I can use this photo without credit because it is from the National Park and Wildlife Service's website. And all of their photos, if you didn't know this, all the National Park websites, any of the photography that's on there, unless it says otherwise at the very bottom, it'll say underneath the photo, all of those photos are public domain. So you can use those as reference for paintings or drawings that you are going to sell, because public domain means that the copyright leaves it open for you to use. Okay. And I have to tilt this. I apologize. You're probably not going to be able to see it, but I need to be able to see it. And I'm going to copy this mountain range here. So I'm just starting off by getting the basic shapes, and then we'll go back in and make it look a little bit more realistic. But I'm just very loosely filling in the line work that I want to have for this mountain range to make it noticeable. The little peaks and valleys in the lines. So when you're doing realism, especially if you're doing a place that is really well recognized, then you really have to focus on all those little peaks and valleys on the actual outline, because it's not necessarily the little trees and the details on the inside. It's that iconic outline that you really need to capture for it to look like that place. The pine trees kind of come up here. And I won't do too much of the water, but I'll just do the bottom line here, a general idea of where the water sits. And I'll put my phone down in just a minute so you can see the photo as well, but I just need to do it to get through the lines here. Oh, I got some sort of notification. Maybe? Oh, Chloe, thanks so much for following. I appreciate that. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. I really appreciate that you're following along. Alright, so I got that line there. Now I'm going to put this phone down so you can see the photo a little bit better here. And now, once I've got the outline, the general outline, I do want to tweak this just a little bit. I think I went a little bit too far, a little bit too drastic on that. There. Okay. Now that I got that done, now again, I'm going to be going back through with pen and then watercolors to bring out the details. But if you want to do this as a graphite drawing, from this point out, it's really key that you focus again on the dark darks and the light lights. And for this particular image, there's also snow in here, which is going to throw off 3D effect because it's going to have that white block. And so it can get a little more complicated. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to restart my DSLR here because I am filming this for YouTube to be edited down later. And so let's see. I would actually start with this mountain right here, and if you're going to focus on the highlights in that, you'll see if hopefully you can kind of see this image. Actually, let's see if I can get my camera to focus on that. I don't know if it will. Oh yeah, that's actually not too bad, I think. So you'll see the sunlight is really hitting this triangle portion of the peak here, and kind of like how I was talking about how the lighting really affects how your drawing is going to look. There's really beautiful lighting in this. It's probably sunrise or sunset because the sun is just hitting it with a nice warm glow. So that's going to be your main highlight if you were to do this in graphite. And when I do it in watercolor, I actually will try to bring that warmth in with the watercolor as well. But let me just give you a small example with the graphite. So I'm going to squint my eyes, like I mentioned before, just with the trees. I'm going to squint my eyes, and then I'll be able to see where the highlights are, which are pretty much the snow portion of it, and where my darks are. And I'm going to focus in particular on this section of the peak right here. And it looks like the darks kind of come down with a line like this. So that is just a rough line. I'm actually going to erase that a little bit too dark. That's just to give me an idea of where that shadow is falling on the mountain. And then I'm going to go through and just quickly add in the immediate dark spots that I see on this peak. And this is rough. Again, it's all in pencil, so if you screw up, you can erase it. Not a problem. But I'm going to add in these dark values that I'm seeing, and I'm sure I look very silly squinting, but it really does help to see your dark values. Now I'm going to go in and make sure I know where my highlights are, and just like I did with the tree, I'm going to darken those values that are right next to highlights so that I'm darkening the shadows to make the highlights pop rather than drawing the highlights. Really right here. And I'm also simultaneously going to start adding in a few midtones here. And that means I'm not pressing down all the way. I'm obviously not drawing my highlights. I'm not drawing my shadows. This is the shadow actually that I'm drawing now. But then right here, very lightly just filling in a midtone. And you should start to see, and I'll see if you're picking that up on the stream because sometimes they're not always clear to pick up the values on the stream. I'll hold it close in just a second once I got enough of this done so you can see a little bit better. I'm filling in with some midtones, and hopefully it should start to look a little bit more like a rock because you're getting those lines, those dark shadows, the midtones, and then your highlights. And theoretically, like I said, realistic mountains, not my strong suit, but I think it's coming out okay. Alright, so I'm going to hold this closer so that you can see it a little bit better. And hopefully the camera will focus here. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. So you're going to see your dark shadows that are creating those lines, the highlights that are popping, and then your midtones as well, which are again, that like lighter gray where I was holding the pencil lightly. So this actually is really important that if you're going to do all graphite for this whole thing, you're going to spend a lot of time building up that mid layer. And if you need to add highlights back in, if you find that you've made it way too dark, it's okay. Either use an eraser that's on your pencil, or if you can get something that's called a kneaded eraser. I don't do a lot of graphite drawing, so I don't have any kneaded erasers, but it's kind of like a squishy eraser, and you can just roll it over the areas that you want to lift the graphite, and it won't be like a hard eraser where it erases the whole thing. It'll just lightly soften it and just pick up some of the graphite, but not all of it. So it's a really handy tool if you're going to be doing graphite drawings to get a kneaded eraser. I would say that's one of the more important, slightly more expensive things that you have to get from an art store. Only slightly more expensive. It's really not that bad at all. But I know for some people getting started, art supplies can be really expensive. So I'm going to move on from this. I'm going to try to tackle something a little bit different. I'm going to tackle Arches National Park. If you've never heard of that, it's a beautiful national park out of Utah. Probably one of my favorite all-time national parks that I've ever seen in person. Beautiful, beautiful rock formations. Not quite a mountain, but it's still stones, and so that's why I'm going to include it, because it's got a little bit different shape and form and texture. So you can see here, this is another image, and this one's from Wikipedia, so hopefully this is actually also a copyright-free image. It doesn't say, it says it may be subject to copyright, so. With this, it's important to understand how these rock formations are kind of coming together, and what is the main rock and what isn't. I've actually been here in person, so I know exactly how I'm going to do this. But if you are doing rock formations like this and you want to do kind of mountainsides like this, because there are mountainsides that kind of look like this in Oklahoma, in the Wichita National Park, Wichita Mountain National Park, I think I'm saying that right. Oh, another notification if it pops up. Thank you so much. I have no idea how to say your name. Trinix Soul, thank you for following. I really appreciate it. I hope you are finding this video helpful. Thank you for following. Wichita Mountains. Where else have I seen formations like that? There's in the Midwest, there's a lot of areas that have rock formations. Maybe they don't necessarily form an arch, but they will be smaller mountains made up of many different stones, and they all come on top of each other, and they're really interesting. So let's go ahead and try to tackle this one. I'm going to try to get the general shape. Oh, sorry, I got distracted. I got distracted with somebody following me. So what I was saying is, if you're trying to draw these, it's really important to understand how the stones are stacked together. So doing a little studying on the formations and how, if you're there at the national park, it's easy. You can just stop in the visitor center, and usually they have all those really kind of maybe boring, depending on if you're interested in it or not, informative things that you can read about how each thing was formed, how these rocks were formed and when they were formed and all that. I'm not super technical about that. I learn when I go, and I don't retain a ton of that information, but once I've kind of been there and seen it in person, I kind of can remember and redraw what I drew when I was there, because I spent the time to draw it in person and draw it from life. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump in. It's too much talking, not enough drawing. Alright, I'm going to tilt this phone here so that I can see it, and I'm just going to abut my lines here and make it look almost like it's the same national park here. And again, I'm going to very loosely get my rough outline here. Oh, another spam call. Alright. And something to pay attention to with this rock formation in general. And you can see I'm already off, and I can tell you exactly how I'm off. I'm going to follow through, and I'm going to keep drawing this. But I can already tell you that if I was to draw this, if I was doing this for a final illustration, that I would redraw this whole thing. And this is actually a really good talking point about drawing from life and drawing in general. So maybe you can see right off the bat what I did wrong here. Let me put the phone down. It's really easy when you show the picture right next to the drawing. What I did here that was wrong is that I made this space too wide. So it actually is taller and thinner. And when you're drawing from life, it becomes a lot easier, and when you're drawing from photos. If I was to redraw this, instead of trying to focus on drawing the shape by looking at the actual shape, I would instead try to draw the negative space between the stones. I don't know if you can hear this music, but it is actually really irritating. Change it because it's distracting. Okay, so if you are trying to draw an arch like this or rock formation, focusing on the negative space might be easier for you. It just depends on how comfortable you are with drawing and what kind of visual person you are, because everyone takes in visual information differently. For me, to draw accurately, looking at the negative space really helps. Another tip, if you're drawing from life, and if you're new to drawing, this is actually a pretty common tip. It doesn't work so well in images unless you're trying to draw exactly. You can kind of hold it up and see the spatial distance here and be like, okay, well, I need the spatial distance to be that. And you can see, obviously, I'm not even drawing to scale at all when compared to this. So you could do it with a photograph, but when you're drawing from life, is say the rock is where you guys are, and I'm looking at the rock. And I'm going to hold my drawing out like this, and I'm going to look at where a certain line or a certain piece of the rock sits on this pencil here. So say the top of the rock is going to touch this eraser for me, and the midline is going to touch the tip of this here. So I'm going to go like that, and I'm going to say, okay, this is the spatial distance as my eye sees it. And I'm going to hold my piece of paper up, and I'm going to say, okay, in my drawing, if I'm drawing from life and I'm trying to do it to scale, is the top of my arch touching this, and is that secondary line touching that? And if it isn't, then you know your scaling is off. There's a few other ways to do that, but that's the rudimentary tip that I can give you. Obviously, it's a little bit hard to do this over live stream without a still life in front of me, but that is something you can do to help improve your scaling when you're drawing realistically from life. And like I said, with photos, it's a little bit harder because, I mean, you can measure exactly, but it's not the same as drawing from life. I can also tell you that this is way too skinny, so I am going to fix that because that's going to irritate me. But that is right. This whole shape is wrong, but I'm going to press forward here and get my lines in, my basic lines, and there's this other rock sitting here. So what I was talking about when how the rock formations come together, when you're in person, you'll see that this is like two different rocks, and they're still, I believe they're still connected in the center of that arch, but there is quite a bit of a crevice here between these two pieces, so you definitely want to make sure you get that, versus here where the rocks are still very much together. The cool thing about arches is that Arches National Park, there's a lot of different arches. They all present in different ways. And they also talk about how eventually these arches won't exist anymore because they are slowly deteriorating over time, and we can do things to try to preserve them, but eventually they will collapse. And rocks will change over time. Something we think of as being relatively permanent still changes. And so capturing that as an artist is kind of interesting, or as a photographer when you're traveling. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shading in here to kind of tell myself where I want my pen marks to go. And you're going to treat this, if you're doing this in graphite, you're going to treat this exactly how you would treat this, where you would do your shadows. And again, this image is obviously at sunset. There's a very, very heavy, warm light coming from this direction going that way. And so you're getting a really dark shadow here, which can be really nice because when I squint my eyes, I really don't have that many midtones. It really is mostly highlights and shadow, which might be a little bit easier when you're just getting started to very easily get that dark shadow in there. So I would go in and I'd do my shadows, and then I'd leave my highlights, and I'd do a little bit of a midtone. But I'm going to do that in pen. Alright, I feel like I've been talking about this one for ages. Hopefully that was all helpful information for you guys. Let's try to do another mountain. It's a little less stone. How about a volcano? I'm trying to think of one that I've actually seen it. There was one in Arizona. I can't remember the name of that. Maybe if I just type in volcano in Arizona. Flagstaff. Oh, there's a few of them. Interesting. I think it was the one in Flagstaff. Oops. Go back here. So let's try to find a volcano because I think that will be interesting. Most prominent land. Yes, San Francisco volcanic field. That is what I saw. We'll do that. And this was cool because it had a lot of ash. I'm getting two different things here. Sunset crater. I think that was it. There was a lot of really cool rock and ash when I went there. It was a long time. It was like, probably over 15 years ago at this point. Oh my gosh, actually probably like 17 years. I'm old. So this is kind of more of like, it's a mountain, right? It's a volcano. But it's not as prominent as, say, this mountain where it's mostly rock and it's like sheer granite rock. It's a little bit softer. It's more gravel-like. There's a lot of mountains like that out there. So I think actually this will be really nice, even though it's not necessarily really recognizable. I think it'll be good to talk about that. So let's go ahead and jump into this. It looks like it's got its main peak here, and then it kind of fizzles out, and it's got a little peak here. I'm going to draw this all the way through here. We're just going to create one big landscape with different types of rocks and mountains. And what's going to be important about capturing something like this is noticing the changes in the terrain. And again, this goes back to studying from the land, but different plants and trees and shrubs and animals all live on the different ranges on the sides of mountains. So you've got like the dense forest at the bottom usually, then kind of like this shrubbery area kind of in the middle, and then there's usually nothing on the peaks or very, very little. And that obviously vastly depends on where you live and what kind of animals and plants that you have, because there obviously are exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, usually we can see the peaks of mountains because there's very little trees or life up there. So for this one, the transition between forest at the bottom, and I'm going to very loosely do this rough forest here because we just learned how to draw trees. So in this case, you're going to take what we learned from the realistic tree drawing and you're going to apply that to the foreground here. I'm not going to do that because we already did that. And that's where I would put those. And then I would focus on creating these tree shapes in a way that creates depth to the piece. What I mean by that is the trees that are closest to you, that are lower on the mountain, are going to be bigger, and the trees that are further away up the mountain are going to be smaller. And just by doing those circles, I've already started to create some depth here. A little bit too much of a line there, but you get the idea. As you move further away, you're going to have smaller and smaller trees. And I will go ahead and hold this close again. It's been a little while since I've done that, and allow you to see, because I know sometimes the pencil can get a little washed out on the stream. Alright, so I'm going to do a little bit more detail than that on this before we move on. Looks like my music stopped, so I'm going to go ahead and switch it up. Let's see, what are we feeling? I think something a little bit more exciting if it's not overwhelming. Carefree, let's try the carefree category. We'll do ambient carefree. And again, if you're curious, all of my music comes from Artlist. I'm not affiliated with them or anything. I actually pay for a license through Artlist so that I can have music during my streams. Excuse me, I'm starting to get a little thirsty here, so I'm just going to take a sip of this real quick. Iced coffee with all the ice melted. I'm not drinking it fast enough. Alright, so I'm putting circles here to represent trees, but what I actually would do, again, if you're doing this in graphite, I'd go back in and actually do the trees individually and put those in first, so that you make sure that you get that depth of that depth into the piece with just the trees. Then focus on the actual shading of the mountain itself and of the terrain of the mountain. So in this particular piece, we've got this like green, almost like muted gray green here in the middle. And so I'm going to kind of outline where that is. Again, I'm going back in with watercolors, so it's not as important for me to define that line until I get to that stage, and I'm going to do that in color. But for you, if you're just going to do graphite, you're definitely going to want to define these lines and make sure that they are clear and that you can see the terrain difference. So this is going to be that light gray-green color here and here. This is going to be black because it's that volcanic rock from this particular mountain. So it's not black, but it's like a dark gray. And when you're actually walking on it, it is dark gray and black volcanic rock and in this crater. So actually, I am going to do some little lines here to kind of indicate to myself that that area is going to be the darkest area when I'm coloring this in. And I'll go back in and erase those pencil lines later, because this is just kind of a mental note to myself that when I go back in and ink this and color it, that's what I want to do there. And then the highlight for this mountain is actually along the very top, which is interesting. It's almost like it's giving itself its own highlight just because it has a lighter shade of rock across the top. So it's not necessarily this light that is causing the highlight, but it is the rock color itself. And so that's going to be a really light brown. And then we've also got this kind of reddish brown here in this area. I'm going to mark that as well. So there you go. That's how that has come together. And so I think those are pretty solid as far as realism goes, and I'll move on to simplified versions. So just like we did with the trees earlier, we're going to move into simplified versions of these. Excuse me, I do need to cough from this. Oh, my battery for my DSLR. Yay. Give me 1 second, I am going to switch this out. So if you are joining in from YouTube, I do see there's a few people watching on YouTube. I will also have a cut down version of this on my YouTube channel, probably with a little bit of a voiceover. So if you don't have time to watch the entire stream, that is okay. You can check out the condensed version on my YouTube channel probably in the next day or two. Alright, and I'm just going to get this going, and let me plug this battery in real quick, and then I'll be right back with ya. Oh, I didn't plug in my twinkle lights today. I forgot. Go ahead and plug those in. Okay. It's nice to give my hand a little break, too. Alright. Now we're going to move into the simplified versions of the mountains, and this is actually pretty simple. All you want to do is kind of mimic what you already did up here, and that is you want to get those basic shapes. And I really should have saved the photos. I didn't learn my lesson with the last. Let me just open a new tab and pull that picture back up for the Rocky Mountain National Park, which was the first image that we did. And the reason I am going to use the picture, and I didn't use the picture for the simplified version, I just used the drawing on the trees earlier, is because I'm not as familiar drawing these locations as I am drawing trees. I'm not as comfortable. I haven't done it as many times. Okay, so we've got our national park image here, and for simple, I'm just going to make sure I get that nice clean line as best as I can. Really right off the bat, try to get those lines correct. And if I have to go back and erase, that's okay. And I I know I'm moving kind of quickly. Like I said earlier, if you are not confident in your line work, you may end up going at a more sketchy like this. Drawing a single line comes with repetition, time, and confidence. Practice, 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 practice. There is no easy way to get good at doing art. It just comes down to doing it over and over and over again. And then eventually, one day, you'll realize, holy cow, I actually can draw a mountain now. Or a cat, or a dog, or whatever it is you're drawing. For me, personally, you'll find I draw a lot of nature, and I don't draw a lot of people, and that is because drawing people is really hard for me. And life drawing and practicing obviously helps. I'm way better than I used to be, but I still don't really like drawing people. Alright, I think that's good. So, instead of just doing the detailed shading like you would on the realistic mountain, what I would instead do is focus on, like I talked about earlier, if you're just joining, I think most of you have been here for quite a while, but if you're just joining, on this particular image, there was a really nice highlight from the sun hitting the mountain. So I would definitely highlight that, and I actually would make that a solid line, which is created not by the rocks, but by the lighting. And then if I was to block this in really simple, then I would make these trees more defined. Maybe not necessarily uniform or perfect, but I would really show that those are trees in a tree formation, and I would group them together, not necessarily draw the trees individually. But it looks like these are actually some birch trees in there, because the trunks are white. So if you were planning on adding color and you had a situation like this, what I would do, and what I'm going to do when I add color, is I would do a solid color of green and then go back in with white and add in the trunks, the little swashes of the trunks. I will show you that. We'll do that on this one when I add in the watercolor. I didn't even notice the first time I looked at this picture. It has a really cool elk right in the front here. That's a really lovely image. Oh no, go back. No, Google. Okay. So that's how I would handle the trees here. And again, that's how I'm going to handle the color here. Now, I want to highlight the snow in the simplified version. I really want that snow to pop. I don't want it to just be a value. I want it to actually look like snow coming down that little valley there. And there's definitely snow here on top of this mountain. So I'm actually going to draw out the lines, unlike what I would do with realism. And I'm going to show snow here. And then when I go back through this, I'm actually probably going to add in some artificial snow to this, just to give it a little bit more of a snowy feel. It'll be really nice to have the snow with the light, kind of like a sunrise snowscape, almost. And there's this nice ridge snow line here. Okay. I think this is good enough for me to understand what I need to do to move into the inking. Again, you're using just pencil, you're going to go ahead and add in your tones. And you're going to have to keep things simple when you're doing graphite only. Less tones. So realistic, wide range of tones. You've got your shadows, your highlight, all the way to your highlights. With your midtones, you're going to have a really wide range of midtones. If you're keeping it simple, keep it down to maybe 4 at the most shades. And I'll actually just really quickly break down what I mean by that. So your highlights is obviously going to be, you're going to outline it, but it's going to have no fill at all. Then, here, let's draw 4 circles. Let's say 4. Start with 4. Your highlight is going to have nothing. It's going to be the paper. Your shadows are going to be the darkest dark that you can possibly do with your pencil. And you're going to have 2 midtones. You're going to have a general midtone, which is not bearing down all the way, but it's still pretty dark. And then you're going to have that mid-range, lighter midtone. and then your highlights. See, I probably might do 5 actually, because you should probably have one more mid-tone in here, even in the simple version. This is also where a kneaded eraser would be really beneficial. I talked about the kneaded eraser earlier. If you filled this in with a really dark, and I'm just going to do it right here, and I'll do it with a regular eraser too, but a kneaded eraser would become much nicer. Fill it in really dark, and then I want to go in and I want to add in those white trunks that I talked about, right? So then I would go back in and I would just wipe with my sharpened end of my eraser. And you'll see my eraser's not sharp enough, so I'm getting kind of huge chunks here. But the goal is to have a really sharp end on your eraser, and you might have to cut your eraser to get that really sharp edge, and then just run it down the line really easily, and you'll get those trunks in there with just the graphite. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's move on. So I'm going to redraw this arch here, and this time I am going to make it taller. I should pull up the picture. Should be good for continuity's sake to pull up the picture here and get it nice and good. Sorry to make the camera so shaky. It's attached to the same stick as my webcam is. Alright, Arches National Park. Pull up this image again. Alright, this time I'm going to try to fix my mistake that I made there and get this negative space locked down here before I do the outside shape. And again, that's just what's easier for my brain to figure out, using that negative space. But it may be easier for you to draw the shape itself. You may find that you are much more accurate than I am. And that's pretty cool for you. Alright, I think that's a little bit better. So now I'm going to draw, as I focus on that negative space in between the arch, I'm now going to draw that outside edge. And I have to focus up a little bit so that I can see it. You can tell I really have to focus on this because I stopped talking. And it's hard for me to focus and talk at the same time. Still getting used to doing that. Like I said, new to streaming. Normally I do just a voiceover. I don't have to focus on talking while I'm drawing. Thanks again to everyone who has joined in today. I really appreciate everyone who's here and who has shown their support and followed me today. It really encourages me to keep trying streaming. And I really appreciate it. I can't even express how much I appreciate when people kind of chime in and say hi. Even just saying hi, really, I'm very thankful that you do that. You take the time to do that. Alright, so I'm getting a little too detailed here. Getting too focused on the drawing. And I'm going to fix this line because it's not big enough. Alright, to keep this simple, what I personally like, and there's a couple of different ways you can do this, but the way I'm going to do it today is that what I love about these rocks is that you can really see the lines, the formation lines in them, in the actual shading on the rock. And so to break down this simple one, first of all, I am going to make it very obvious where the edges of the rock are. And I'm going to really pull in those shading lines on this one because I think it's really cool. And this, what I'm doing right here, is what I do when I'm travel sketching. You know what I really should have done? Maybe I'll do it after the break. What I really should have done is pulled out some of my travel sketchbooks and just shown you really quickly what I do when I'm on the road and when I'm drawing from life. Because I actually use toned paper, and I use a white gel pen and an ink pen to create those artificial highlights that we talked about here. And I use the paper as the midtone. I will show that. I'll show that after the break. So let me just finish this and finish the last one. Okay. I think that's looking pretty good. So my highlights and my lines are going to be really strong on the simple version of this. And then lastly, the volcano. I'm not going to pull up the picture still pretty solid about the volcano. So I'm going to just do these two arches here. And do this. And then I'm really going to highlight the different tonal differences here, like I did in the last one, but I'm really going to make it look like almost a spotted mountain range at first. And then when we add color in, it'll make a lot more sense. I'm doing this really quickly. I'm trying to speed it up just a little bit today, because I am going a little long, and I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. So I have to finish filming before then. So I'm going to fill this in, and then fill in the tree shape here. Okay. And that's all I would do for that. And then when I add the color in, that's when I'll do the trees. But you could also add in your trees as well. Alright. And then finally, stylized. So how would I stylize these? Again, so many possibilities for how you could stylize things. If you've been here since the beginning, which I don't think there's many of you that are still here. Maybe there are a few of you still here. When I talked about trees, I talked about how you can pull the style from any video game or cartoon or anything at all. I am just going to go with what comes naturally to me today, but you really can pull influence from just about anywhere, and I would suggest you try to challenge yourself as you go along to try different styles, and eventually you will find a style of your own. My stylized version is going to be pretty similar to what I did in the simple, just a little bit more stylized, a little bit more exaggerated. And what I mean by that is, for this particular mountain range, because what is so impressive about it is this peak, I'm going to emphasize that peak more than it actually is and really pull it in dramatically. And then I'm actually going to bring it down further. So I'm emphasizing this kind of really dramatic shape. And I am drawing this a little bit bigger than the realistic and the simple version because it's a little bit easier for me to do so. Actually, I should try to keep it similar so it makes more sense. Try to keep it on the same height. So what I mean by that, I'm bringing this peak out more dramatically. And then I am really emphasizing this valley down here, much more than it actually is in real life. And then I'm going to bring this peak up more dramatically than it actually is in real life. So you're going to get this sharper V more than the casual U, because for me it's the height, the point of this image is how interesting this peak is. And what else am I going to do? So I'm not going to focus so much on the snow, and instead I actually want to create like this river coming through. And that's going to come in the water that's in the front here, if you'll remember this drawing. Oh, I need to scoop my page up, sorry about that. So remember, if you've been here the whole time, the realistic water here in the front, I'm going to really emphasize that water now in the stylized version. And then I'm going to focus on these trees, this tree line here. And again, I'll add that in when I add in color. And then I have this secondary mountain range here, where I have another tree line that's slightly smaller than this front tree line. I'm keeping this very simple because when I go back in, I'm going to do a much better job with my watercolors and pen. And again, that really nice highlight and color we had, I'm going to emphasize that right here. See this really interesting shape. It's not necessarily how the light actually touches the rock, it's just kind of this really cool shape that I want to emphasize. Alright. Now we're going to move into the arch here. And again, I am going to really stylize this. I'm going to pull this arch up and really make it a little more taller and almost like a doorway. And I'm going to emphasize on this piece the stripes of the rock, because that's what really speaks to me, is the red rock stripes. And I'll probably end up doing almost like a Borderlands style on this. That video game pulls a lot from almost like a comic book style, where you have the heavy outlines and then the blocks of color. So I'm definitely going to do more of that when I add in color. It's really simple, stylized, not realistic at all, but very fun and playful. Okay? And then finally, this last volcano here. And now I emphasize a little bit more of a crater than there actually is. So you know it's more of a volcano. And then I'm actually going to nix the trees completely, except for this front tree line. And then I'm going to make it like a spotted mountain. And I'm going to make the darks really prominent when we add color into this. Alright, so there we go. Whole lot of work today. A whole lot longer than I originally intended to spend on this. But hopefully you found this helpful and interesting. I had quite a few of you at one point kind of dropped off a little bit. I know I've been talking for a really long time today. But we have our realism, our simplified versions of those, and then our stylized version. And I am going to take probably about a 5-minute break, and I'm going to pull out my pen and ink and some sketchbooks to show you, and my watercolors. And then we are going to go ahead and ink these, and we'll see how far we get with that. Alright, stay tuned. Hello, hello. I'm coming back. Okay. I got my water, I got my watercolors, I got my pens. I'm going to try to move this on a little bit quicker than I did previously. It was a lot of information I threw at you. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys tuning in. Now, so I mentioned my travel sketchbook. So I'm just going to show you really quickly what I do when I'm traveling and when I'm on the road and drawing from life. So this is an example of what I do when I'm traveling. This is a little ruins of an old house from called Madame Sherry's Park. It's in New Hampshire in the United States. And so this is an example of what I do. I use the ink from my microns, which I'll show you in just a second, as the shadows and as the lines, and then I use a white gel pen as my highlights. In this particular case, there's snow. This was more of a realistic drawing, right? It's slightly stylized because it's not perfect values and shading, but it is a little bit more realistic than, say, this, where I'm straight up just being way more abstract. And I'm drawing a real waterfall, but I'm making the rocks total different shapes and things, doing more of a Zentangle feel to it. So that is very different than it's another example of how you can stylize. I also have these little splashes of water with the gel pen. A lot of fun to do. So I do a lot of that when I'm on the road and when I'm traveling. So, and then I will also show you, since I pulled it right out of the shelf, I will show you this. Another example. So I went to this museum in Korea, in Busan, and I drew some of the things that were there. So obviously getting very detailed, very realistic with this, but still keeping it sort of stylized in the sense that I'm not doing true values. I'm popping the highlights, I'm drawing the shadows, and I'm doing as much detail as I can, but it's not necessarily 100% realistic. And that's a lot of fun for me. It's easier for me to use the toned paper as my midtone. And also, I mentioned the tree that I thought one of my trees was starting to look like, and this is that example there of this tree that I drew when I went to the memorial in Korea. So these trees were really cool, and you can see I spent a lot of time doing the texture on the bark, and I think it came out pretty neat. I'm going to zoom a little bit on this, because I know sometimes it can be kind of hard to see the clarity of that. So that's an example of a finished tree from my sketchbook. And I didn't do that many highlights in it. Actually, I don't think I did any highlights. I just used the midtones and the shadows. And I still think it created kind of a really interesting texture. So this is just one example of how you can do trees in your sketchbook. This could be a finished illustration if I really wanted to and I didn't draw it on the border, but that's an example of what I was talking about earlier. Alright, back to our pieces here. So we have everything drawn. I'm going to start with the trees first. And I'm just going to talk about my microns really briefly. If you are tuning in from YouTube, you're probably super familiar with my micron usage. If you're tuning in on Twitch, you might not be familiar. What is happening here? Alright, there we go. So, if I was working on toned paper, then I would use both the black microns and also these white jelly roll pens. And I have two different sizes of jelly roll pens now. I used to only have one size, but now I have two, which is really nice. You can find those on Amazon, and I think they have them in store at Hobby Lobby as well. And both of these, let me double check that before I say it, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Both of these are the Kura brand, so they're from Japan, both the microns and the jelly rolls. So they are available for sale in Japan and then in anywhere that carries them. Otherwise, in the U.S., that is Hi, Not Listed. No, not any wood burning right now. I'm doing a tutorial, and I will be wood burning tonight. I will be back on at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, and I will be doing some more wood burning tonight. But I'm trying to film this video for YouTube today, and so that is what I'm working on right now. But I will be on tonight if you want to join me then for some wood burning. And so for this particular piece, I'm going to be using just the black microns to get us started. I'm not going to be doing, I'll show a little bit of shading with just the microns, but I am mostly going to be doing just line work with the microns. I predominantly like to use the 02 and the 05, and then I might use a little bit, I'll keep the 03, and I also use the 05 for general shading. I also am going to pull out here one of my Pigma pens. Oh, nope, this is a Settler. I don't know what happened to my Pigma. I had a thicker Pigma pen that had a nice brush tip on it, but it looks like I don't have it in this bag. So we will do without it today, but I'm going to be using mostly watercolors to fill in the color, and so I don't necessarily need that Pigma pen. Let's see what the Settler is. Oh no, that's the felt tip. Don't want to use that for this. Alright, well, we'll make do without it. So I'm going to be using 02, 005, 003, and since I don't have the straight up 5, I'll be using the 08 too as well. Alright, so I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I don't want to have to leave this on a tangent. I want to finish these. So if I am drawing realistically, again, I honestly, actually, normally if I'm trying to be the most realistic that I could possibly be, I would probably just straight up do this in watercolor and not do it in pen, because when you draw with a pen and create your outlines with pen and then add watercolor with color, it automatically makes it feel cartoony because things are not outlined in real life. You're going to get more realism out of doing either your values all with graphite, all with color, or all with pen, because there's going to be that consistency of highlights and dark values, and it's just going to be a little bit more clear, more realistic, not more clear, that you are creating that mid-tone, that range from dark to light that is created naturally with the human eye when you're viewing things naturally versus when you are viewing an illustration. Alright, so I haven't done much talking about what I'm actually doing here. I am not going to do all of the line work here. I'm just going to do the branches that I care about the most. And then I'm going to let the color fill in the rest of those branches, and especially when I add in some color leaves. So that's all I'm going to do for this tree. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I'm going to do a little bit more of line work right here, just to show a little bit more texture. Now, I will show you right here on the bottom, if I was to do this just in pen, and I want to create my values, I would not use that one. I would use the 02, and like I showed you in the travel sketchbooks, I would just create my shadows like this by creating little tiny lines like that, and that creates that dark shadow there. Your highlight, you're not going to touch at all. If you were doing the toned paper like I showed you just a few minutes ago, then you would be using that white gel pen to create the highlight, but with this you don't do that. And if you want a mid-tone, so this is a shadow, if you want a mid-tone, you would still do the lines, but do them further spaced apart, lighter, very light with your pen, almost like you're just barely scratching the surface of the paper. And then you can create that mid-tone. They're going to be spaced out, they're going to be very light. And here, I'll hold this up nice and close to the camera so you can take a closer look at that. And so the spacing really matters. the line weight really matters to create those shades, that mid-tone, that highlight. Okay? So that should give you an idea of how to handle that. For this tree right here, we're moving on to the pine tree. I really want a strong trunk, so I'm using this 08 to just really fill it in where I want my trunk lines to be. And I am doing 3 different lines for those. Just gotta get that tree texture. I am not, actually I take that back. I'm not gonna add color to this one, so I'll go ahead and show you how I would handle this with pen. So immediately, just like I did with the pencil, I'm going to go right in and I'm going to do really thick lines all the way across. And that doesn't look very realistic, but we'll fix it in just a second and I'll show you how. I'm just kind of blocking in the general shape that I want this tree to be. Okay? And again, if anytime you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments. I know there's a few people that have just tuned in, so I am working on shading this pine tree. So again, blocking in colors, very loose, very rough. Then I'm going to go back in with my 2, and just like I did when I was drawing it in pencil, I'm then going to start bringing in little needles to kind of add details. And honestly, I much rather would probably use an 05 for this rather than an 02, but I can't find my 05 today. We're just going to have to make do with the 02, roughen it up a little bit. The 05 would probably give a little bit of a faster coverage here. So I'm going to go in and continue this like squiggly lines that I'm doing, and then occasionally add in some pine needles on the edges to really define that shape. Okay, I'm just going to show you real quick. I feel like this is still too many lines, and I'm not really going to fill that in very well with an 02, so I'm going to switch back to my 08 here, and I'm going to fill in just the center of that line. Because we still want to leave some highlights, but we want the tree to feel really nice and full in this bottom section. So I'm going to go back in, add more darkness into this. And really give it shape to pull through. And then switch back to the 02 and draw in my little pine needles here. And I'm going to just emphasize that trunk a little bit more. And really pull in those pine needles with this 02. Nice and sharp. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to go back in with the 08, make this a little bit darker. I think I went just a little bit too fast through here. So I'm going to pop those shadows in with the 08 on these 2, and I probably won't do that after the next one because I don't want to make it too dark on top. You really want to emphasize that there's more space between the needles at the top of the tree, which is how those pine trees kind of look, those fir pine trees. Okay. I'm going to go back in with my 02 and do my little pine needles. And pull those through. And you can see it's starting to kind of come together and look like a tree. Roughly. Well, I think my music is up. I don't know if you guys can really hear the music all that loud, but it really helps me to focus to have music on. I'm going to just pop some music back on. So I'm going to keep doing these little needles. We're almost finished with this one, and then we can move on to the palm tree, which I think is a lot more fun than the pine tree. But I want to make sure you get the right idea as far as shape, especially here at the top. At the top you get a little bit more sparse and detailed. Like that. And again, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the comment box. Alright, I went through that kind of quickly, so I just want to make sure that you understand what you're seeing. I'm going to restart my DSLR here. Alright, here we go. So it's looking pretty good. Alright, let's move on to the palm tree. Again, I'm going to be adding color to these, so I'm going to keep this relatively simple with the pen. But if you were doing this all with pen, you're going to go back to this kind of shading that we talked about here. Alright? Especially for the trunk. I started off with an 02. I don't like that right off the bat, so I'm going to switch back to an 08. Really bring in this heavy shadow line here. Bring this one here. And the only thing I'm going to do on the top part, because I really want to add in color. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do all this one in pen and ink. I think I'll like it better. So I'm going to bring all of those little needles that we talked about out from that previous drawing. And the more needles you add, the more it'll look more realistic, and the less needles you add, or the more needles that you group together into shapes, the less realistic it'll look. I'm really going really thick and really dark with this, and I'll pull some more highlights back in. See, that's a different way to draw it, and it looks much more stylized than this does. Okay, so you can see that I'm pulling that the individual the needles for the palm tree out. Again, we talked about the movement a long time ago. I don't think anyone is still watching from early this morning, but talked about how palm trees really have this really nice movement, and so if you're going to be drawing palm trees, you really need to try to capture that movement that they have as they blow in the breeze. And so I'm trying to do that by creating that movement with how I'm drawing little individual needles to give you the illusion that this tree is floating, it's blowing just a little bit in the wind. Alright, just a few more on this one. And we'll move right along here. Alright. I think that's coming out pretty nicely. And I'm just going to do a little bit of shading with the O2 here. So a couple of lines on the trunk here. And when we get to painting, I'll show you how I would have handled this if I wanted it to be just paint. I'll kind of do what I did here and just do a little branch. So I'm going to show you there are definitely other ways that will look a little bit more realistic with just the watercolor. Alright, so lastly we've got this boba tree that I still probably am not saying that correctly, but I'm going to switch back to the 08 micron. So we've got this tree, and again we're going to focus on the foreground only when I'm using this ink, because I am going to add watercolor. If you were using just the pen, you're going to draw all the branches individually just as you would before. So we're going to do this. I'm just going to just focus on those foreground branches. And I am not, actually I take that back. I'm going to do just the bottom of the foliage with pen on this one. And just like I keep saying, honestly, if I wanted this to be really realistic, I would keep it either all in pen or all in watercolor or all in graphite, rather than combining them like I'm doing, because this is going to automatically make it feel a little bit more like a cartoon because I'm outlining the tree. So I just want to really emphasize that. It's going to look more real than the stylized versions we did, but if you really, really want hyper realism, you need to focus on values and not outlining. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do for those. Okay, as we move on to the simplified version, a lot more ink is going to be used because these are simple shapes and they're literally going to be blocks of color. And so I'm going to just really, let's talk a little bit about line weight. And I've talked about line weight in a lot of my YouTube videos that specifically focus on line weight, but since we've got some time to talk. Line weight is really important. If you've never learned anything about it, it's super important when you are creating depth in a piece or interest or overlapping elements. You don't want to always use the same line weight. So you can see I'm using an 08 here. Like I said, I really like to use an 05, but I can't find it. And I'm going to see if I have an 03 here, because for this piece I really want to have a very, oh, of course I find the 05 now that I've already done the top. Of course that happened. Alright, so I'm going to go back in with an 05 and do a couple more trunk lines. And you can immediately see the difference in the line weight between the outside lines that I did here and the inside lines here. And I'll hold this up nice and close so you can get an idea. And actually, I'll do one more line with the 02 so you can really get an idea of how different these lines feel. Alright. So, you have your 08 on the outside, your 5 on the mid-range here, and then your 02 here on the inside here. Very different line weights that create different values and depth in a piece. So line weight is definitely very important, especially as you're doing these simplified trees. You want to focus on your line weight. Alright, so I'm going to keep going with this, and like I said, these are going to have probably the most amount of ink here. I'm going to continue to do my bark texture. A mediocre man, thank you so much for following, I really appreciate it. Oh, I love the little bee emoji, that's so cute. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask, and I appreciate the follow so very much. Thank you, thank you. Alright, so I'm creating this texture, and I'm using the 05, and in just a minute I'm going to switch to the 02, because on the top branches I really think the 05 is going to be too thick. It's going to be too prominent, and we want the upper branches to feel like they're kind of receding away from you, because typically you're not going to be as tall as a tree, right? So the branches are going to be further away, so you want to use a thinner line to create that kind of distance with line weight. And again, this is the simple version of the tree. We're going to go back to the realistic version and go ahead and add color to that once we finish doing all the line work. And I know I mentioned a long time ago, that was probably like over an hour and a half ago, that for the simple version of the leaves on this tree, I'm going to do this general blocky shape. And it probably won't make a ton of sense in just ink, but it will make a lot of sense when I add in color. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a block shape where the green for the leaves will go, and then I'm creating these kind of blob-like shapes on the inside, these small blob-like shapes. That's going to be the sky showing through the leaves. And then I'll do a few little individual leaves here off the edge. I think it is a really adorable emoji. I haven't seen it before. I'm still kind of new to Twitch, so it's pretty adorable. Little bee emoji for those of you that are streaming on YouTube. That little tiny bee emoji. It's adorable. Okay, so for this, I'm not going to do the entire thing here. If you sign up for the mailing list and get the downloadable version, I will do the entire thing. For the purpose of this stream, just to keep it nice and concise and not super boring, I'm going to move along here. But basically what I would do is exactly what I did here. I will continue to do that throughout the entire thing. Alright? And if you're watching this YouTube on a replay, I will have the final version shown at the end of the video when I edit it down. So be sure to subscribe and check that out, because I'll have a little bit more of a concise finished version after the stream. Alright, so for this one, very simple. I'm going to go in with my 08, going to block out these shapes really nice and thick on the bottom. And again, I'm going to use the line weight to really emphasize that this is the bottom of the tree and this is the top tree. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm still using the 08, but I'm going to go lighter. I went really heavy on the top there. So you can see, even with the same pen, I was able to get a little bit of a thinner line weight there. And I'll show this up close in just a minute so you can get a better look at it. let me finish it off. So I'm going to pop over to the 05 micron pen, and then I'm going to go a little bit lighter. And then for the very top of this tree, we're going to use the 02, and we're going to go even lighter. And you'll see in just a minute when I hold it up to the camera, the difference in the line weight that creates. And it's a little messy, but that's okay. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how you can utilize the line weight to your advantage when you are doing more simplified trees. So really heavy on the bottom, really light on the top. And we're going to go back and add color to add in shading to that one. If you were using just the pen for the shading as well, you would definitely want to continue to use the 08 on the bottom, the 05 in the middle, and then the 02 on the top to do your shading as well, so that your line weight is consistent all the way through. And you might even want to make it darker on the bottom layers and lighter on the top layers, because the bottom layers are going to get less sunlight and the top layers are going to get more sunlight naturally. Alright, I'm going to move over to the palm tree here. I'm not really feeling this palm tree all that much. I think it's probably my least favorite. I'm going to move through this one pretty quickly here. Just going to use the 08. And I'm going to use the 08 to pop the bottom of the leaves, and then I'm going to use the 02 to really make them feel thinner. I'm really, in this case, using the 08 more of it as a undershadow of the leaf. And the 02 is going to be more of just a general outline. Okay? And again, I'm blocking the needles together. So unlike up here where we did the individual needles, we're making one simple shape for the simplified versions of these trees. And I'm going to add a little fun little swirly in here. Not quite realistic, but just a little bit more fun. Like I said throughout this video, I am very much a stylized person, and realism does not come naturally to me. I really like to have fun and play around, which is probably why this bottom row is going to be my favorite when we get to that. Alright, I'm going to switch back to the 05, just kind of give this a thicker line here. This is going to be the leaf that's furthest away, whereas this leaf is going to be a little bit closer, so I'll use 05 for that one. Okay, and this midline, and then again here, using the 05. I'm not even following my pencil lines at this point, I'm just doing what feels natural. You may find that you need to follow your pencil lines a little bit more closely if you're not as comfortable with drawing, and that is okay. Alright, simple version of the boba tree. Let's see, I'll start off with the 08 again, and really going to emphasize this trunk once again. It is the most fun part of this type of tree, and I'm going to emphasize all of the branches in the simple version. In this version above, if you're just joining, in the realistic version, I only did it in the foreground branches, and the background branches are just going to be color. But in the simple version, I'm not really trying to create that 3D depth all that much like I would with the realistic. And so I'm really using thick lines to block out solid shapes in the more simplified versions of that tree. And I could realistically switch back to 05, but I'm just not feeling it. I'm feeling this nice thick line for this tree. And I'll be honest with you, my hand's getting a little tired today. I haven't done this much drawing in quite a while. I've been focused more on pyrography, which is what I was doing last night. For those of you that were here last night, I think some of you were. I'll do a little bit of shading on this. Actually, I'll bring in a 02. And I'll do a little bit thinner shading on this tree with some line work, just to make it a little bit more different from the other one that we're going to have mostly in color. I don't want them to feel too similar. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the really stylized version. So I'm going to have a lot of fun with these. And I'm just going to play around. I'm going to use kind of the same examples of line weight on the bottom, thicker line weight on the bottom, lighter line weight on the top. I'm going to do a lot more inking on these, simply because it's, for me, my particular style is heavy pen and ink with a little bit of watercolor just for color. And I know I mentioned this a couple of times, but I think I've got some new people who have just jumped on. When you're working on the stylized versions of these realistic trees, you can do that in any style that you want. So really explore what style feels good for you personally. I'm going to start with this tree because I'm pretty confident I know how I want it to look. I'm going to use the 08 on the bottom, do really thick bottom lines on this tree. And I'm going for my own wacky, cartoony style. You may want to take reference from a video game, or from a comic book, or from a movie, or whatever, and it may look completely different, but you really just want to catch the emphasis, what is the word I'm looking for? Essence. The essence of the type of tree, but not necessarily capture exactly what it looks like in realism form. You want just the essence. And what I mean by the essence is the overall general shape. So if you were to break down, this pine tree is essentially a triangle with a stick through it. If you want to break it down into its most simple form. And so when you're stylizing, all I have to do to be able to stylize and have it still feel like a pine tree is to follow a general triangle with a stick through it. And if I do that, people are going to kind of see the pine tree in this, right? They'll know it's not quite a pine tree, but they'll know where I was kind of pulling my reference from. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do these lines, and I'm actually going to create this like weird line texture here. I want it to feel like this tree kind of is like, rather than the branches going up and out, I want it to feel almost like a flower where they fall open like petals. I'm really having fun with this. This is just nothing that is based on reality. It's more just for fun. It would be like a concept from maybe a Dr. Seuss video game or a cartoony style video game. You can see all sorts of little bird creatures crawling in and out of this. It's almost looking kind of mushroom-like now that I'm getting further along when adding in these textures to it. Just a little bit like a mushroom or some sort of weird flower maybe. So I think that's kind of fun. I like that. Alright, I'm going to move on to the angel oak here. For the stylized version of the angel oak, really emphasizing my bark texture, because that's what I love about trees, is this really nice bark texture. And I apologize, I do need something to drink. My throat is starting to hurt here. Just gonna take a drink, keep moving forward. Right, and you'll remember if you've been here from the beginning, I added in this Spanish moss. So I'm going to go in with the 05. Now, these really, really tiny, you probably can't even see it on camera, the very tip of this. You have to be very careful with these. You have to be very light with them because they can break very easily. So I'm just going to very easily go squiggle down some Spanish moss very lightly and get that squiggle line. And we'll go back and we'll erase our pencil lines, and you'll be able to see that a little bit more clear, because I know right now it's a little convoluted with all the pencil lines that I did. But I'm going to go back and erase this once the ink dries, and you'll get a better picture of how that looks then. And I'll hold it up close. Once I finish all these stylized versions, I'll also hold it up close to the camera so you can see up close exactly the line work that I'm doing. And the trick to doing stylization is just having fun. I know I've said that a couple of times already, but I just want to really emphasize that, you know, you can start in realism, but then by the time you get here, you're not even looking at your reference anymore. You are working based off of what you've drawn realistically, and you're just having fun with it. You're pulling from your imagination, you're pulling from other parts of your life. So for this particular angel oak, even though I didn't have Spanish moss, I'm pulling from when I lived in Savannah, Georgia, and everything is covered in Spanish moss, because to me that just speaks to me. And that's the point of the stylization, is to really give it a character, give it a feel, give it a place to live. Is this swamp tree? Is it a rainforest tree? Is it a tree from the north or the south? Is it a tree that has animals living in it? Does it have bugs in it? Does it have holes in it? This is where you can really have fun and play around and not have to worry about it looking like anything in particular. And if you're interested in concept art for video games, you have to get really good at exploring shapes and taking from realism, from reality, and running with it, and just playing with shapes and styles. And if you work for a game studio or if you work for a movie company, you're going to have to adapt their style. So the more, if you want to be a concept artist or an animator, the more styles, the variety of styles that you can copy is going to be very valuable to you. If you can get really good at mimicking style, that's going to be really good. If you're doing more like storyboarding and you really want to stand out, finding your own unique style is going to be very important, because unlike some artists that have to copy a particular studio's style, when you have your own style that people really like or that becomes popular, that's when you get into making your own films and you get higher up in the industry. You get popular off of your particular style. Same if you want to be an illustrator. You want to kind of develop your own illustrative style of doing things, whether that's your color palette or the way you're drawing or the particular medium you use. So, for example, I make these videos. I do a lot of pen and ink, and for a long time, pen and ink and watercolors was my medium of choice. But recently, I've gotten into pyrography and adding watercolors on wood, and I'm finding that that's more my style. And now that I've kind of found that style, it's taken me a very long time. It's taken me over 12 years to really feel confident in my own style and what I'm doing. I'm now getting people who are buying my work because it is unique and different and something that you can't see anywhere else. So it really depends on if you really want to make a career out of art. You don't have to. You could be just doing this as a hobby, and that's cool too. But if you really want to make a career out of it, you need to decide which field you kind of want to aim for. And obviously you can change your mind. I've changed my mind many times since I was in high school. But you want to try to study how you need to learn how to draw for that particular industry. And that's really important because it's not always the same. I talked a little bit earlier in the beginning of the stream about drawing for animation versus drawing just to draw, and how animators have to focus on the movement in their drawings. And I think that that is just another example of how you're going to learn how to draw differently depending on what your drawing is going to be used for. The coolest thing about being your own artist and just focusing on having your art in a gallery or a museum. I haven't been in a museum yet, but I've had multiple gallery shows. The coolest thing about that is you can do kind of whatever you want. I mean, obviously, you want to try to create things that are going to sell, right? But you also kind of can speak to whoever you are as a person. It's not the easiest field to get started in or to grow in, but it can be very rewarding. And after, like I said, 12 years of really struggling and working through things, I'm just now starting to see some small measure of success being a artist. But I've also worked as a freelance artist. I've worked for video game companies, and I've worked for corporations doing animation and drawing. And so it just really depends on what you're going for. You could make a lot more money working for other companies. I talked to somebody last night who said that they love doing art as a hobby, and I think that that is also super valid and super amazing, to have it just as a hobby and be really passionate about that being a hobby. You don't have to make money from it. It can be just something that you absolutely love to do and really enjoy, and that's totally cool too, to build a skill that's just for fun. Because sometimes, now that it is my job, there are days where I don't feel like drawing, and I have to because it's my job. And don't get me wrong, I love drawing, I love creating art, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I've totally chosen the right career path for me, and I totally love it with all my heart, and I'm so passionate about it. But that doesn't mean occasionally that it's a little bit of a struggle and feel kind of a little bit of pressure. I have to say, out of all these trees that I've done today, this one is my absolute favorite. It's just so funky and fun and playful. I don't even know what kind of style this is. It's not necessarily my normal style, but I just think it's so fun, the little dots. I'm really looking forward to coloring them in. You can see I'm mostly sticking with the 08 for these. And if I really wanted to do a full illustration, I really should be switching between the line weights. You know what, I am going to switch to an 02 for the circle weave things here up here. I've gone really abstract with this one, but I just love it so much. And I've gone away from the realism of it. But we're almost done inking. And I actually am going to move into the color and finish this off rather than ink the mountains first. And then that way, if you have joined and you're interested in the trees, I won't switch gears on you. I think last time there was a lot of people earlier on today that were really interested in the trees, and when I switched to mountains, they all dropped off. Which is okay, because if you're not looking to draw mountains and you want to draw trees, this is a little different. Alright, I'm just going to finish off these circles. You'll see I'm being super rough with this too. I showed it earlier, but I think there's a lot of new people watching. You can also invest in a circle stencil like this. Normally I actually have a metal triangle, and in future streams, if you follow and you catch other streams, I like to use the metal triangle with circles in it much better. This is cheaper, but it works, does the job. I couldn't find my triangle this morning. A lot of times I actually just draw circles from scratch because I prefer the handmade feel, but if you're really going for a clean geometric feel and you really struggle with circles, a little stencil like that can really help you. And no, it is not cheating. It is nice to be able to draw circles by yourself without a stencil, however, it is not necessary in any way, shape, or form. And especially in today's day and age when most people are digitally drawing. Even looking at Twitch, you'll see a lot of people digitally drawing. It's much easier to digital draw and just plop in a circle, so there's no shame in using stencils. Alright, so, oh, I forgot my little circles. I'm going to go in and add those in super quickly. I don't want to get too involved in this. And like I said, this is by far my favorite tree that we've done today. But I just want to get those little circles in because I love little details, unnecessary details. And then after I finish all these little circles, I'm going to pull out my watercolors. We're going to talk just briefly about color and lighting. I'm not going to go too in-depth. I don't want to be too boring, especially since, you know, I don't know which color you're going to use. And watercolors are very different than acrylics. They're very different than markers. Whatever you're going to use, I kind of just want to keep it in general. So let's just talk just slightly about adding color. So, and I did touch on this much earlier when I was talking about creating values when you're trying to do realistic. So we've got our realistic trees here, our simple trees, and then our stylized trees here at the bottom. For the realistic trees, you want to focus on creating that value, creating that shadow and that highlight. When you're adding color, you need to think about light. What time of day is it? Is it cloudy? Is it sunny? Is it raining? All of those things are going to affect the colors that you're using. Now today, I'm going to go against everything that I know as an artist and use the stereotypical colors. And what I mean by that is the stereotypical colors is that leaves are green and bark is brown. Just the stereotype of what a tree is. If you ask a kid, it'll be the sky is blue, the grass is green, a tree trunk is brown. That's actually not really true. When you start to get into realistic painting, and especially hyperrealism, you start to pay attention to colors and their relationships and how the lighting affects colors. I'll explain to you. I'm going to start painting. So just like I said, I'm going to do the stereotypical. I don't recommend you do that. If you are really trying to draw or paint realistically, you need to look into how lighting affects color. There's a couple of really good books, and I am not going to remember the name off the top of my head. It's got a dinosaur on the cover, and it's like Guide to Light and Color or something like that, or Color and Light. I'll link it. If you're watching on YouTube and you watch the stream again, I'll try to link it in the description box on YouTube so that you can check it out. It's a very key book that talks about those things much better than I could. Alright, so I'm going to get started, and I'm going to tell you a story about how I first realized that a tree trunk has other colors in it. So it actually was my third year in art school, and I was taking a watercolor class, and the teacher kept getting mad at me because she kept telling me to look at the other values that were in trees other than brown. And all I was doing was I was actually just taking this dark brown right here that I'm using, and I was just using that in all of my trees. And she was trying to explain to me how lighting works. And she took us out into a park. If you've ever been to Savannah, Georgia, they've got these squares with, in the center of the square is usually a statue, and then they're surrounded by these beautiful angel oak trees that I'm doing right now, covered in Spanish moss, and the lighting is really beautiful and dappled. It's very pretty. And so, you know, she was getting frustrated with me because she was trying to explain this to me, and I just was not getting it. I was like, it's brown. The trunk is brown. I can't see anything else. And she's like, just look closer. Just really forget that it's a tree and look at that trunk and tell me what colors you see. And I would say it took me about 10 minutes of staring at this tree trunk. It's very boring. I'm getting very frustrated. I'm thinking, what am I not seeing? Is there something wrong with my eyes? When it kind of dawned on me that this particular tree that I was looking at, the trunk had purples in it. And the base color was still brown, but what was happening is that the really bright sunshine was shining through the leaves, and it was projecting this green ambient light onto the brown, and it was creating this like purple because the brown has a reddish tone, and the green was kind of combining with that, and it was just making this deep, soft purple. And it was like my mind finally clicked what she was talking about. And I can't even tell you how much time that took. But once I got it, I got it. And now I can sit down and I can really analyze and look at something and see the colors that are there that your mind is telling you this is just a brown tree. And you kind of have to just work through that. And it can be very challenging to work through that because your mind just wants you to believe that everything is a solid color because it's ingrained into us when we're kids that this is this color and that's it. But it's really, really not. And once you start to realize that, you can really start to paint realism a lot better. Alright, so now that I've told you that story, I'm just going to talk here about what I'm doing. If you've been watching, you'll see that I'm adding shading, I'm adding different value. I'm using a burnt sienna watercolor, as well as, burnt umber. Pretty sure that's a burnt umber. These are Winsor Newton watercolors. They are my favorite. They're pretty expensive, but they last quite a long time. And you get a really nice range of values when you're using these. And I'm just switching back and forth. I'm trying to keep a couple of highlights in here. They're kind of artificial highlights. I'll probably go back over. Actually, I'm going to knock a few of these back. I'll show you. I'll just use the burnt sienna very, very tiny bit of burnt sienna and just lightly knock back that highlight, because there are, okay, there's a few exceptions. If you're drawing like silver or something like that, or something like metallic, there are white highlights. But in nature, there are no artificial white highlights. Even on water, which has, you know, those white lights from the sun, are still going to have just slight color tone to them. They're not going to be a pure bright white. So even though sometimes it's nice to leave whites in, and I like highlights a lot, so I leave a lot of white in my illustrations, if you're trying to do realism, you do not want those bright white highlights. You're going to knock them down just a little bit. Okay, so it's coming together pretty nicely. I just got to keep a close eye on the time here, because I do have a doctor's appointment this afternoon, and I'm hoping to finish this before then, but I'm moving kind of slow. But hopefully this is really helpful to you, and feel free to say hi in the comments if you have any questions. I know there's people popping in and out today. It's kind of been a much longer stream than I originally anticipated, but hopefully it's been pretty helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and pause on this tree for this bark. When I upload the version to my email subscribers, you will get the full colored version. But I'm going to switch over to the leaves so that you get an idea of what I'm going to do for the leaves for this. So I've talked about this already a couple of times, but just in case there's some new listeners, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a general color first. And then after I do that general color, I'm then going to go back in. I'm going to let it dry for just a second. I'll move on to the pine tree, and then I'll come back to this tree after the general color dries. Now obviously this is a thing that I have to do because I'm using watercolors. I have to give it time to dry before I add in the next layer, or it's just going to blend the colors together. Luckily this paper is a cardstock paper, so it's going to dry pretty quickly. A, because this room is really warm that I'm in. B, because it has these really hot lights on it that's going to absorb the color. And C, because this paper is so cheap, it absorbs the water pretty quickly. And that's all good things for streaming, because it moves a little bit faster. Normally watercolors is a very long and tedious process. So I'm going to let that dry, and we'll come back to it. Now, I went really heavy with the ink on this pine tree, but I'm going to show you just really quickly on the side here. If you were going to do a pine tree in watercolor, I would not do any pen and ink if you're trying to do realism. Maybe just the trunk. But even that, it's so much easier to just do the watercolor. Take your trunk color, whatever you want the color of that trunk to be, and plop that down. And I'm going to do this really small, and I'll hold it up to the camera afterwards so that you can get a better look at it. And then go back in before that dries with whatever green you want. I'm going to use a combination of 2 different colored greens. I know that this darker green that I've got my brush in right now, if you can see that on screen, is, I believe, Viridian. I don't remember. This other green might be sap green. I just purchased it recently. I don't have enough water here. And I'm going to go back in and really quickly blot down these segments, that just like we did with the ink. And block these sections in. Just the middle part. Don't have to get into the pine needles just yet. And just get that general shape in. And then really go heavy right here in the middle so you hide that tree bark. And then you're going to take a smaller brush. I'm going to use this teeny tiny 000 Winsor Newton brush, and I'm just going to pull from the still wet center and pull out some needles. And I'll show you up close what that looks like, because it's probably pretty hard to see on the stream, but I promise you, just give me 1 second. I'm going to do this on the top here before it dries. Do this on the side here before it dries. So you can see what I'm talking about. So I'll hold this up nice and close to the screen so you can get a better indication of what that looks like. So that is what I would say, push your values with just color rather than combining pen and ink and watercolor on this particular piece if you're going for realism. Obviously, as we move into the more simplified version, I will show you this technique with your heavy pen outlines because it really just depends on what you're going for. Alright, let's move on to the palm. Actually, let's see. This is dry. So let's pop back over to this one and finish this off just real quickly. So after my general green color has dried on this angel oak, I'm now going to go in with that dark green, that viridian green, and I'm going to mix it with what like I said before, I'm pretty sure this is sap green over here. I'm going to mix it with that just to lighten it up just a little bit. Go back and forth, mix them together to get something that I really like. And then I'm going to do the individual leaves, just tiny little leaves here and there sporadically so that you get the idea of the individual without painting every single leaf. Like I said at the very beginning of the stream when we first talked about drawing realistically, the naked eye really doesn't individualize every single leaf unless you force it to, unless you focus specifically on a branch. It kind of groups shapes together, and it understands that mentally you understand that there's individual leaves, but you don't necessarily process every single individual leaf. So unless you're going for hyper detailed realism, which most artists don't do, because it's too overwhelming for the eye, that is what I would suggest you go for if you're going for a more realistic. And I'll hold it up nice and close again so that you can see. Let the camera focus here so that you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about, because those lines are really, really tiny and really small. I'm using a very small brush for this. And so that is what I would suggest if you're doing a realistic tree, mixing the pen and ink and the watercolor. And if you can do it right from scratch with just the watercolor, that'll look even more realistic and you'll get more into that. But I don't know which particular paint you're going for. You can achieve this look with any other paint. With acrylic, it'll dry, it'll take a little bit longer to dry. It will look slightly different because you won't have so much of the overlapping. Your opacity is thicker on acrylic. You won't have as much combining of colors as you're getting here unless you water down your acrylic. You can get it with oils, literally markers, anything you want. I'm just showing you an example of how I would handle it. Now my DSLR battery has run out, so I'm just going to switch out my camera real quick. My battery. Bear with me a minute. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments section. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm just going to go ahead and switch this out. I haven't been that great about recording it on my DSLR, but I'm trying, and hopefully I'll be able to download this stream and figure it out. So, if you're just joining, I'm just switching out the battery on my DSLR real quick. So sorry for the shaky top cam. That'll stop for a second, and then we'll move on to painting the palm tree. Well, that's interesting. Why is that battery so dead? That's not good. Well, looks like I'm going to lose my DSLR. Because I don't have the light switch on. That's a bummer. Alright, give me 1 second. I'm just going to start recording the stream because I want to make sure that I get this part of the video. And then we'll just turn this off and I won't think about it again. Alright, so let's pop over onto this palm tree. Obviously I did really heavy ink here. And so I'm going to show you right next to it, just like I did with the pine tree, how I would handle the palm tree without any ink at all. But first I'm going to show you how I did this, how I would do this. Actually, real quick, I have to find an eraser. Because those pencil lines are creating value. And if I put the watercolor on top of the pencil lines, it will make them permanent. I won't be able to erase them because the watercolor will sit on top. And I want to be able to really put in a vibrant color here. So I'm going to go ahead and erase those pencil lines. And while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and erase some of these pencil lines as well, because I don't want them to show through on the watercolor. This is kind of like what I mentioned earlier. A kneaded eraser would be better than this, because with a kneaded eraser I could still have the pencil lines much more faintly. It wouldn't erase all the way, and then it would give you a a little bit more of a outline to follow. I don't need that outline. I'm pretty confident about where I want my lines to be, so I'm just going to erase this all really quickly. And as I mentioned before, if you've still been around since I was inking this piece down here, we'll talk more about it when I add color in. But Spanish moss, you can really see that, those thin lines popping through now that I'm erasing out my pencil lines here. And as you get more confident, I know I've said this a couple times, but for those of you that are just joining in, as you get more confident, you don't even need to have pencil lines. You don't even need to draw in pencil first. I promise you, if you practice and practice and practice and really draw the same thing over and over and over again, eventually you won't even need that. And when I am drawing, I almost never use a pencil anymore. The only time I need a pencil is when I'm doing a demonstration for other people, or when I am drawing something that I've never drawn before. Or, I will take that back, I do sometimes still need a pencil if I am doing a particular portrait of a person, because like I said before, I really don't like drawing people all that much, and I'm not super confident at it. I don't feel like I am a confident person when it comes to drawing people. I feel much more confident drawing animals and nature. Okay, so I'm almost done here. It would have been a lot easier if I had one of my white erasers, but it is what it is. I didn't want to make you guys wait while I track one down. That was my mistake. Alright, so we're going to pop into this pine tree here and go ahead, and I'm going to start off with the burnt sienna again. Now, palm trees are actually a little bit lighter. I'm not going to pull up my reference photo. I kind of have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull in this yellow ochre color. I believe it's yellow ochre. Gosh, I really need to brush up on my paint colors again. I'm not used to having to say them out loud live. I usually am just writing it down and afterwards in a voiceover. So I'm going to mix this together and to get more of like a tan color, and then I'm going to plop that down first. And like I said, I'm not going to leave any artificial highlights because I'm trying to go for a more realistic look here. Barring if you're just joining, I spent a significant amount of time talking about how we have this stereotypical view that trunks are brown and leaves are green, which is not necessarily true, but that is what I'm going to follow through on this particular tutorial, because we don't have a direct light here. We don't have a realistic source of light, so I'm just doing very flat colors, even though we're talking about realism. So I'm just going to pop this green in here, and if you were paying attention, you'll see I mixed 3 different colors to get this green. I honestly couldn't tell you what I just did. It's become so second nature to mix different colors together when I want a particular thing that I'm not quite good at saying it out loud, but I mixed yellow with green. I have this pre-mixed light green at the very top here. I don't know if you can see that in the stream. Yeah, you can. I have this pre-mixed green that I mixed half of the yellow and half of this bright green here. And because I use this color a lot in a lot of my color palettes and illustrations and sketches. So if I was doing this 100% with watercolor, what I would actually do instead of doing what I'm doing right now is I would use this darker sap green, or maybe this Viridian, kind of mix it together, get something that's a little bit darker, then also mix it with a little bit more brown to make it even more kind of muddy or green. And then I would draw the line, the center line of those palm leaves first. And then just like I mentioned when we were drawing it in pencil, when we were drawing it in ink, all the little tiny lines, needles that come off of that are going to follow this spine that it has. So I would draw this first, and then I would go back in with that green that I need to mix more of with yellow, this green, and then I would actually probably not use this big of a brush. I'm going to do this real quick on the edges here, and then I'm going to switch brushes. This is just really thick and heavy, and it's kind of too heavy for what we're doing. I'm going to switch to this smaller brush here. This is a 2. These are cheaper brushes, by the way. I switched back and forth. I kind of didn't really talk about that. Just really quickly, nicer brush, $15 to $20 per brush. This is Winsor Newton Watercolor Series 7 000 for fine details. Very nice brush. This came in a pack of 20 from Walmart. Even though I am a professional artist, I do have both crappy brushes and, I shouldn't say crappy because they do their job. Cheaper brushes and more expensive brushes. They serve their own each individual purpose. So the cheaper brushes are great for general washes of color, for doing anything rough, if you're doing dry brushing or something that's going to damage the brush really heavily. Cheap brushes are great for that. You can see I'm kind of just blocking in color here. And so again, we're talking about what I would do with this tree if I was just using watercolors. So I've blocked in the stem with nice dark green, and now I'm going back in with this lighter green to add in the needles. And then, once that dries, I'm going to set that aside, but once it dries, I'm going to go back in with my more expensive, really nice, tiny needle brush and add in the final details to that. But I got to let that dry first, so we're going to move on to the boba tree real quick. Alright, I'm going to use similar colors for these two, even though this, actually, I take that back. I'm going to use a little bit more brown for this, because, rather than the burnt sienna, because if you actually look at these trees, they're almost like a muted brown, and I think that's because they get so much sun, versus the angel oak, which gets a lot more moisture. And so the angel oak is usually a very rich color, while the boba tree, or boab, I think it's boab, I think I finally said it right, tree from Africa is getting a lot less moisture. The bark is also going to be very different. The angel oak bark is very textured, and these trees are much more smooth bark, as far as bark goes, anyways. Alright, I'm just going to add this in. I don't want to keep these artificial highlights. I don't want them to be white, but I do want to kind of keep them there just for a little bit, because I want to block in where I want the darker color to go. I'm using this darker color as my shadows, as my shading here, and I want to create a nice mid-tone color is what I'm going for right now. So we're going to go back in, we're going to add darker shadows into this, and then we're also going to bring some color into those highlights so they're not so quite so fake. Because like I said, we're trying to go for a little bit of realism here. Not total realism, because we still got the pen lines, but enough realism that it feels like a nice mixture of both. Okay, I think those are coming together pretty nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and block in the color for the top as well. And this I will pull up my reference image again, because I don't remember exactly what color those particular leaves were. Baobab. I really wish I could say that correctly. Alright. So they are like more of the yellow-green, and they're much more spread out than our other leaves were, so I pulled up a different reference photo here than I showed earlier. I'm going to go ahead and use that. I'm going to mix this yellow ochre color again with a little bit of the sap green. I think that will give us the color that I'm looking for. Really muted, kind of muddy green. And then I'm going to block these in. I'm going to block in the solid color closest to the bottom of where the leaves start, where the branches meet. And then because the tree really does kind of have these sparse leaves, after I block this color in on the bottom here, I'm then going to go back in, and instead of blocking in a solid color, I'm just going to block in these little blobs here like this, and fill it in with little blobs of color. I'm not going too tiny with them. I'm still building up a pretty thick, consistent layer. And I will show this close to the camera in just a second. I know I haven't done that in a few minutes. So I want to show these close to the camera so that you can really see all the little details that I'm adding in here. But just give me a minute and I'll go ahead and do that. Oh, that's a little too green. Alright. It's coming along pretty well. And I'm going to have to let this dry before I can move forward with it. But you get the idea. Let me show you this really up close. So we've got our palm tree, which is almost dry, so I'll hop back over to that and show you that as well. And then we've got the babo, whatever tree. Oh, maybe somebody's going to help me out with the enunciation on that one eventually. And so we've got the rough color of that as well. Let me move this over just a little bit. I don't want you to be able to see it on the stream here. Okay, so we've got the base color here. I'm going to let this dry, and we're going to hop back over to this palm leaf here that we were trying to do a little bit more realistically. I'm going to stop on this tree. I think it's fine for what it is. You really could go more realistic. I went a little too heavy with the pen lines on that one for it to be considered a realistic tree. I would call that a little bit more simple or stylized, but I think you get the idea, hopefully. Alright, so now I'm going to go back in with my nice expensive Winsor Newton 000 brush, and we're going to go ahead and add the little tiny details. I'm using this dark green that I have, and I'm probably going to use that straight for this particular part. And I'm using quite a bit of pigment and not a lot of water to add in tiny details. I'm going to get really close to the screen, so you're probably not going to be able to see my face for a few seconds, because I like to go really nice and close when I'm doing this and really get tiny little lines. And I promise you I will show this up close to the camera, because I know there's probably no way that you're going to be able to see that right now this far away, but I'll bring it nice and close and you'll see exactly what I'm doing. I'm just using the very tip of this really nice thin brush to add in some little tiny line marks to those palm needles, and that's really going to add this extra detail and highlight in, and it's going to make it feel a little bit more realistic. Not totally realistic, because I'm not taking enough time. Honestly, if I was doing this hyper realistic, this would take me a lot longer to build up the layers very, very, very slowly. But I'm doing just enough so you can kind of see how detailed you can get with some of these smaller watercolor brushes that are a little bit more expensive, but they're totally worth it. Totally worth it. Alright, I think that's enough to kind of show you the difference. Let me hold this up nice and close so that you can see it. Let the camera focus on it for a few seconds. Hopefully I can hold my hand still enough. And you can see, once it focuses, how those nice dark green, tiny lines that I created added this extra layer of depth and really brought it to life a little bit more. Now, for me personally, because I don't do hyperrealism, I then would probably go back in with the white and add in some artificial highlights, but I'm not going to do that today because we're going to do that on the more stylized trees. If you're going for more hyperrealism, you're probably going to want to go a few more layers of detailed color on this. So it's just a matter of what you're really going for. Hopefully you can see those nice tiny little lines. I know it can be kind of hard to see unless you're looking in person. I think it's picking it up pretty well today. My computer's doing pretty well today. Minus our few bumps on the audio this morning. I think the stream is actually, oh, I shouldn't say that, I don't want to jinx it. Alright, so I'm going to go back to this baobab tree and do a little bit more details on the, well, I already put yellow on my brush. Normally I would go for the trunk, but I'm going to start with the leaves because I already loaded up all that yellow. Now this tree again has the really muted green, so I'm going to mix the sap green in with the yellow here, and maybe even bring in a little bit more of the yellow ochre again. And now that I have it mixed, I mixed it with the cheap brush, but I'm actually going to rinse this off and use the smaller brush for this part as well. If you're using, oh no, actually that's a nicer brush as well. This is a 0 and versus the 000. And I don't even know actually if you'll need to see that on camera. Maybe if I hold it close enough, you can see the difference between the two of a 0 and a 000. 000 is very, very, very small. Yeah, I don't know if the camera is going to focus on that. Come on, work with me today. Well, okay, it's not quite working with me today, but you can kind of see the difference there between the two. You get really nice details with this 000. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to take the color that we mixed with the cheaper brush, and I'm going to go in here and just kind of pop in a few little leaf marks here. Very few. And something that I didn't talk about, but that I'm going to talk about right now, is that for this particular tree, you could leave it at this. You could leave all these nice little tiny details that I'm going to show you up close in just a second, once I'm finished. Or, because these leaves do kind of feel, it feels a little too full. And these trees do get kind of sparse on the top, and you really see the branches a lot more. I think it's feeling a little too full for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tiny brush, I'm going to take some of this dark brown, mix it within a burnt sienna, and then I am going to go back in and add in a few little tiny branches, just randomly where I feel like there's a little bit of negative space there. And what that's going to do is, rather than our mind blocking together, oh, this is a full canopy of foliage, adding in the little branches, and especially if I add in a few branches that don't have any leaves on them, it's going to open it back up. Your mind is mentally going to realize, oh, there's quite a few branches, and that's not as thick as a foliage as the angel oak has over here. So that's one way. If you feel like it's feeling a little too claustrophobic, or a little too full, I should say, go ahead and add some of your little tiny branches in there. And like I said, I'll hold this up nice and close because I don't know how detailed you can see from this far away. Just give me one moment and I'll hold it up close to the camera, let it focus, and you'll be able to see all those little branches that I just nicely added in there, and use all the little details. So you can go ahead and do that too, and it'll make it feel a little bit more sparse along the top rather than your mind blocking all those colors together. Let me just finish off the bark here on this tree, and then we'll move on to the simple versions. And from here on out, because I'm not focused so much on realism, more simple and then stylized, I think it'll go along a lot faster. And hopefully I can finish off about 3:30 p.m. my time so that I can make it to my doctor's appointment on time. Really want to finish this off. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comment box. I see that my number has gone up quite a bit, so if you have followed along, you're just joining in, we covered a lot of topics today. I probably won't get, I did cover the topic of drawing mountains. I might have to finish that up later tonight, coloring the mountains. I don't know if I'll quite get to that, but we'll see how fast I get through this tree section here. So I'm just covering up my artificial highlights. Again, you do not want those white artificial highlights if you're trying to go for realism. And quite honestly, if you're trying to go for realism, I wouldn't have done the 6 pen lines. But it is what it is, and I was just trying to show you a variety of different ways that you can try to draw, paint and draw a little bit more realistically. Alright, we're going to move into the simple. Like I mentioned, I'm going to go really quickly through these. I'm pretty sure I know what I want. I'm going to block in very simple shapes. I'm not going to do too much mixing and too much shading because, again, we want these to feel very graphic, very 2D, not necessarily more realistic with shading and highlights and everything. And I'm choosing colors more for fun rather than necessarily choosing colors that are realistic to what the tree would look like. Okay? Think more like greeting card, or maybe a cartoon strip, or what else? Maybe a logo. These are a little bit too complicated for a logo. You probably would want to go even more simple for a logo. But just keeping it very simple. Again, this is a cheaper brush pack from Walmart, number 6, flat brush. I also like using the filberts, but I think I'm all out of those. And what that is rather than being flat across the top, it has more of a curve to it. Excuse me, I do have to take a drink of something. My throat is killing me. I'm just taking a look at the chat. If you have any questions or just want to say hi, I appreciate everyone who pops in and just says hi. It's nice to see that people are watching. I really appreciate you all being here today and taking some time out of your busy days to check out some art. It makes my heart happy to be able to teach some drawing and just hang out with other art enthusiasts or art lovers. Okay. I'm just going to finish blocking in this color. I'm being a little messy here, but you know, I'm trying to make sure that you retain the information just as much as I produce something that's a little cutesy. Alright, I might go back in and just add a few dark brown lines. That's just a little bit. Like I said, I don't want to get too hyper realistic. I want to keep it kind of simple, but since I did add some of those pen lines in there, I just want to emphasize those with color. And if you didn't add the pen lines in, then you can go ahead and just do this as well with just the color, and it will still have the same effect. It won't be as strong as a graphic effect if it's black, but if it's just color, but it'll still be really nice to pop in some nice colors here. Alright, and now I'm going to block in the color on the top. And one thing I am going to do that's a little bit more, I'm going to block in the color on this, and then I am going to use a lighter green, and then I'm going to go back in with a darker green and add swirls, but I'm going to have to let that watercolor dry. So we are going to come back to that once I fill this in, but first we'll fill it in. And I'm mainly doing that for fun, but I'm also going to show you how you can play around with different layers, especially when you're using watercolors that you can control the pigment on. And what I mean by that is I am using tube watercolors. I'm not using palette watercolors, even though I have it in a palette. These tube watercolors have a lot more pigment in them. They are more expensive, but they give you a little bit more control rather than palette watercolors do. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you're kind of struggling to get the pigment that I'm getting, that's because I am using watercolors that came from a tube. They're Series 3. They're more professional. Or not, excuse me. They're Series 1. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry. We're going to go back to the palm tree. I'm going to use this yellow ochre for the palm tree, and I'll go back to using this brush, which is actually a mid-range brush. Not inexpensive, but not sold. It's still sold individually. I think it was like $4 or $5, I want to say. And this has been a pretty solid brush. It's lasted quite a long time. Usually, the reason you can see with the cheap brushes is they start to crack around the edges here. And nicer brushes last longer, which is why they're more expensive. But only if you take care of them. If you treat your brushes like crap, you're better off just buying cheaper brushes because you're going to have to replace them more frequently anyways. But you should try to get in the habit of treating your brushes nicely because it's worth it to try to find that one brush, which for me is definitely this brush, is my brush that I love and that I take care of, versus some of these kind of rougher brushes that I don't really care about. So you'll see I'm doing something a little bit different than I've done before. I'm adding in this color here on the center. And what I'm going to do, and it's a little bit harder to do on this cardstock paper. If you're not using watercolor paper, if you're using watercolor paper, it'll be so much easier to do this. But I'm using cardstock because I think that's more affordable and readily available to people who are learning how to use different paints. Cardstock just is much cheaper. Watercolor paper can get pretty expensive, especially when you get into like the nicer brands. I use Arches. It is stupid expensive, but it's archival, which I haven't really talked about in this stream, but archival means that it will last a long time, hundreds and hundreds of years, theoretically. And so if you're a professional artist and you're making art that you want to sell, you want that art to outlive you after you die, most likely. And so using archival materials is really important if you are trying to do that. So I'm trying to blend this color. It didn't really work exactly like I wanted. You can kind of see the layers here, and when I hold it up closer to the camera, you'll be able to see it a little bit more efficiently. But I'm just going to finish this off. I was trying to blend the colors together, but it's drying just a little bit too fast for me to be able to do that. If you are using watercolor paper, you can add a little bit more water and reactivate it, and it'll blend those colors together really nicely, and you can get kind of like a ombre gradient between two colors, which can be really nice to add a little pop to a more simplified tree. Or even if you're doing a more realistic tree, you can do shading a little bit more efficiently if you're using watercolor paper with watercolors. You can already see I've added quite a bit of water, and this paper is starting to buckle on the edges. And that's because I've added just a little bit too much water. That's something to keep in mind if you are practicing on cardstock. It is going to get a little wavy, and you may have to, as it starts to dry, once the surface is dry but not completely dry, then press it in a thick book or put layers on top of it to kind of press it back down and stop it from buckling. And you may still end up with a buckle of the paper. So that's something to keep in mind if you plan on framing your pieces with watercolor paper. Nice watercolor paper won't do that, it won't buckle. Alright, so this is this pine tree. I did talk about this a little bit. Let me hold this up close so you can see where I'm at here. Just so we keep getting a nicer look at, a more detailed look at what I'm doing. keeping it very simple, a little bit of lines here and there, but for the most part, very, very, very simple. All right, we're going back down to this pine tree. I talked about this when I did the inking. Use the thicker line weight when I inked it, and how if you were just doing pen and ink, you would probably still want to use it darker, then lighter, then lighter, then lightest. And I'm going to do that with the watercolors. So I'm going to mix this sap green with this dark viridian green, and I'm going to use a really dark, really thick color here on the bottom. And I went a little bit over my lines there because I'm using a thicker brush, and I probably shouldn't have done that, but mistakes were made. All right. I'm using a lot of pigment. I'm not going to do a solid color because I'm going to show you a little bit another way to do a gradient. And let's see how it works on this cardstock paper. We'll see. I'm going to use, I'll use this one, this medium brush. That's pretty easy. It's a cheaper brush. It'll be really easy for you to find something like that similar. And I'm going to pull the pigment down with just water. Okay, so you're creating a gradient from the pigment that is at the top. Now you may not be able to do this with palette watercolors. You may have to use tube watercolors. You may be able to do it with palette watercolor. Experiment, play around. When that dries, it kind of looks like a solid color right now for me. But as it dries, you'll notice it's going to be darker right along this hemline and lighter right on the bottom. And it'll create a nice shading, even very simple, not necessarily realistic, but it will be a really nice gradient for this particular tree. So that's just something that you can try. Actually, I'll stick with this brush. And I'm going to use a little less of the dark green as I go up the tree, because like I said, I want the bottom to be the darkest, and then I want it to get lighter and lighter and lighter. I might even end up adding a little bit of green to, a little bit of yellow to the top, just to make it a little bit lighter. But I kind of want to keep it this rich green rather than a light green, because we've already done so much light green. It's my favorite, that's why. Alright, and now I want way less pigment, and I'm just going to use that pigment from the top and pull it down just like I did the previous. And you can already see it's so much lighter. I might end up actually wanting this to be a little bit darker, but I'm going to move forward and see how the next layer turns out. I'm going to use the sap green, and I'm going to use just a tiny bit of this green here. Oh goodness! My cat just cuffed the back of my arm. You just scared me! You scared me! What are you doing? Interrupting! Oh my goodness, that scared me. Alright, so I'm going to use this color that has a little bit more green in here. Of the lighter green, the medium green. A little bit too much. So, not too bad. I'm kind of getting a different tonal green. And I think you can see now that it's starting to dry, you can really see that variation down here. Now that it's starting to dry already, you can see it's a little bit thicker in the middle than it is on the edges. I might want to add a little bit more dark green to that and pull it in. Again, I'm using cardstock, not watercolor paper, so I can't rework this too much because otherwise it'll just buckle and warp. I am going to make this middle layer just a little bit darker though. I'm going to add a little bit more of this dark green in here. Okay. So, add that in. I think that's looking pretty good. And then for the very top, I'm just going to go back in with this green, just a tiny bit of the sap green, and a lot more water. I really want this to be very light. And it's already looking too dark. So what I need to do, you have two options. If you have a paper towel readily available, you could dab that and remove some of that water and pigment. I unfortunately forgot to bring a paper towel in here, so I'm going to wipe the water off of my brush, and then I'm literally going to rub the brush and let the brush absorb some of that water. And there we go. I was going to pick up some of the pigment along with that. Alright, so let me go ahead and show this again close to the screen so you can see that gradient a little bit closer and a little bit nicer. Obviously I'd be able to get a little bit of softer gradient and stay in the same tonal range a little bit better if I was using watercolor paper, but I think that's not bad for cardstock. Not bad at all. I'm pretty happy with that. I think it's coming along pretty good. Alright, let's move along to the simple angel oak tree. I'm not actually going to do too much here. because I think I gave a general idea of how to do it on this holistic version. I'm going to do something very similar, maybe not so many different tonal ranges. I'll probably do more of this burnt sienna. For the simple version, I am going to leave some white highlights in on this one, and I will actually show you, let's see, which tree should I do that in? I'm going to show you how to add artificial highlight, probably to this one, with my white gouache. So I will do that. We also have to finish this one up, so I'll do that after I do this. So in this one, what I'm trying to do is block in the color, but still leave in those white artificial highlights that I said. If you were going for realism, you don't want to leave the white highlights in. You want to make sure they have at least a little bit of color in them, because nothing is actually, in nature, is true white. Everything has at least some sort of tonal range to it. But here we're going for a more simple, graphic, stylized, so more artificial whites will make it feel flatter and more of a graphic feel rather than a 3D feel. And that's what we're really trying to go for those. So that's what I'm trying to do there. Okay, so I got the basic color mapped in for this simple angel oak tree, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the leaves real quick. Again, I'm going to move pretty quickly on this. If I was to do this all the way through, I would still follow what we did up here for the realism, which is I'm going to block in the color, and then once that dries, I'm going to go back in with a tiny, tiny, tiny brush and add in tiny little leaf marks. I'm also going a little bit darker here. I'm not going as light green because I'm going for that flat graphic style, the more traditional. Leaves are green, bark is brown, very, very, very simple. Not focusing too much on shadow or on lighting in these trees here in this middle row. I'm just focusing on blocking in that color. I see a few people have joined in here. If at any point you have any questions, I'm moving along pretty quickly, so if you are getting confused or if something I said doesn't make sense, please feel free to chime in or just say hi. It's so nice to see people saying hi in the chat. I really appreciate it. You letting me know you're here. It keeps me motivated. Makes me realize I'm not talking to myself here. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to hop back over to this tree over here. I'm going to pick up my 000 Winsor Newton watercolor brush, and I'm going to use the darker green. I don't want to use this radiant green. I kind of want to keep it more in the brown range. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this sap green with this kind of dark brown that I have here. Make it a really, really dark green, almost a brown color. And you might not be able to see this far away, but when I hold it up close to the camera, hello, and then there it is. I love your screen name. That's so fun. Thanks so much for saying hello. I really appreciate it. And your screen name is super, super fun. So I'm going to go in. I'm going to bring this in. You may not be able to see it this far away from the camera, but I will hold it up close to the lens when I'm done, and you can get a better idea of what I'm doing. I'm adding in these little swirl marks, just like I said I was going to do. This is a little bit more stylized rather than simple, but I just want to show you that you can go back in with a lot of pigment and really add in some other little details or marks that you may not have thought to do in the first place. If you were doing this all in pen and ink, you may want to add these swirls in ink rather than in color, but since we were doing color, I just wanted to show you kind of how I would add some graphic texture to the leaves at the top of the tree. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Again, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to ask them. I know sometimes I can talk a little bit too fast for some people, especially if they're trying to paint and draw at the same time. Alright, so let's hold this up nice and close to the camera. You can go ahead and see that really nice lines, those textures that I added in. And really look at the difference between more realism, so I'll pull this back a little bit, the more realistic tree that has the branches and the individual leaves and the spacing, and then to more simple, blocky shapes that are a little less detailed, a little more simple, a little more saturated with the color as well. Because I was trying to go a little bit more graphic, less realistic. Alright. I did say I was going to pull some natural highlights. This is pretty dry already. Can't believe how fast this is drying today. Alright, so I'm going to go in on my white over here. Let's see if you can see that on the stream. Yes, you can. Alright, so I'm going to whiten this up. I'm going to pull these white highlights in with this really thin brush that I have, and I'm just going to show you, this is gouache. It is a type of paint, not as frequently used, that has a lot more pigment than watercolor. It can be applied on a lot thicker. I only use white, and I only use it for highlights. So if I wanted to bring some more artificial highlights back into this tree, I would just go in and do these little tiny lines in this white. And I might have to do that a couple of times. The white is kind of dirty right now because I was painting something last night or 2 days ago, and I got too much color in the white. So I'm just going to wash this out just a little bit so you can get a little bit more pure white. If I really wanted a really, really strong white, I would actually pull it straight from the tube rather than using it from my palette. I usually have it on my palette here to mix it with other colors when I'm trying to get more artificial colors. Alright, so I don't know if you can see that far away, but I'll show it up close in just a second. The thing with the gouache is, if you have a lot of pigment underneath it, it will blend with that pigment. So sometimes you have to do it a couple of times, or like I said, take it straight from the tube if you want to get that really nice clean highlight. But it's something that you can really have a lot of fun with and play with. And something that I normally would probably do, other than these lines, is I would go in on the very edges and just add it in as like a highlight, as if the sunlight was hitting the very bottom of this tree and knocking out these really bright highlights at the edge of the tree. Alright, let me hold it up close so that you can see it nice and clear. And so you can see the lines that I did. I had to repeat these a couple of times, and I got a little bit more of the white there. I didn't have to repeat those as much. And then little highlight kicks right here on the end here. Let me see if I can hold that still. I know my hand's a little shaky today. Alright, so hopefully you get the idea there. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I want to keep rolling along. It's 3:30. I was hoping to have this done by then. Definitely that's not going to happen, but hopefully I can finish this off for us today, and then I will take a break for a few hours and then be back tonight with some more great information. Alright, so for the stylized, since we don't have a ton of time, I think you kind of get the idea of how I've kind of changed things along. I love this tree, and I really want to finish this today. So this is where, like I said, just as when we were drawing in pencils, just as when we were drawing with pen and ink, you really want to have fun with the stylization. So obviously from this particular tree on this edge, we've gone from realistic to more simplified, and now we're going to stylized, which is completely not really based in reality. The only thing that I based in reality was the height of the tree, the thickness of the trunk, and kind of the sparsity of the foliage itself. And I'm going to have super fun with this. I'm going to go with some browns with some purple in it, tie it back in. If you've been here long enough, thank you if you've tuned in for as long as you have, if you were able to catch the story that I told about how I see colors that aren't necessarily, how you train your brain to see color. If you missed that, you can catch it in the restream if you're interested, because it is kind of interesting to focus on how our eyes perceive color in different lights. But I'm going to go ahead and add in this like brown purple, completely not based in reality, but super fun, I think. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in. I'm going to go over these white dots, but I'm going to bring them back out with the white highlight, just like I showed you up here. I'm going to use that to my advantage to speed up the process, because if I was trying to paint around each individual dot, that would just take forever, and I'd have to use a really tiny brush for that. I honestly very rarely do that. Usually I paint my details and my highlights back in because it's a faster process. And honestly, I don't think it makes too much of a difference. Sometimes you can tell the difference between a highlight that's left from the natural paper, especially if you're doing more like watercolor landscapes. But a majority of the time, especially with the fact that most media is photographed or printed or put on the internet, you're really not going to be able to tell the difference once it is properly photographed, scanned, edited. So we've got probably about 10 minutes left, so if there's any pressing questions that you have, feel free to drop them in the comment box below. I'm going to pop off. I'm going to head to my doctor's appointment after I finish this up, and then I am going to pick this up at 7:30. I do want to do some wood burning tonight. If you're not familiar with my channel, I also do wood burning. That's what I traditionally do. And I will be doing that tonight as I hang out with you guys. But I also want to finish off the mountains that we started earlier. So I will be on Twitch at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time if you want to catch that as well. I appreciate everyone who has tuned in today. So let's just go ahead and finish off this tree. So I went for purple, so I'm going to go for a little bit more purple. I've got these new purpley pinks that I just purchased recently. I don't remember the name of the colors. I'll try this. I think that's going to be really fun for this stylized tree here. I just want to really end this on a good note. I'm going to leave some of these smaller circles actually white, and I'm going to then use a pink for the medium-sized circles. Looks like my music cut up. I'm just going to... Oh, thanks so much! And then there is this. Ooh, tongue twister. So thanks so much. I really appreciate that you're going to check out the replay because I covered a lot of information today. It's a really long stream, but you can go ahead and skip ahead to the parts that are really what you're most interested in. I drew these completely from scratch, starting with a reference all the way down to what we're doing now with color. So you can follow along and draw with me if that is something that really excites you. And feel free, if you have questions about this video at a later date, pop into another stream and feel free to ask me questions about other streams. I don't mind answering questions at any time about any video that I make. If you guys have checked out my YouTube channel, if you have any questions about anything that's over there, I love answering your questions. It makes me feel like I am actually helping you guys to draw better and to make different creative things. And also, if you create anything based off of this live stream, please share it with me. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. I'm on YouTube. I do a little bit of Twitter, but not really. I don't check it that often. Mostly Instagram, a little bit of Facebook for those that are in the older generation. Myself included, by the way. And I'm on all the social medias. So if you create something and you want to share it with me, please tag me on whatever social media that is that you're on. My handles are usually Artist Explores the World or Artist Explores or something like that. You can see all of it linked in my profile or on my website. And feel free to tag me, share with me. I will check it out. I'll give you a like. I'll give you a comment as long as I see it. If I don't respond, it means I didn't see it. So do let me know if I don't respond to you. I respond to everyone who tags me. I'm still a relatively small creator, so that's pretty easy for me to do because not that many people are tagging me, so I usually catch them really easily. I want to see what you guys are creating, especially if it's based off of something that I showed you guys how to do. So definitely let me know how it goes for you guys. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And I'm just finishing this off with a few lines. I'm going to add in some fun little purple lines here. I really love this color. I'm going to have to look up what it is because I just started using it recently. And I don't remember the color. And then the final thing I'm going to do with this tree after I finish these highlights, excuse me, these are not highlights, these are shadow lines. Actually, they're more like texture lines if I want to get technical. Is I'm going to go back in and pop out those circles, those teeny tiny circles, which you may not be able to see, but I'll hold this up close to the camera when I'm finished. I'm going to go back in with this 000, wet this white gouache here, and then I'm going to go back in and put in all those little tiny, tiny, tiny little dots. And that is the last thing we're going to do today. And I'll show it up close once I finish. So the music has stopped. I'm not going to restart it because I'm trying to finish this off here. If you were listening earlier, all of my music is licensed through Artlist. I'm not an affiliate or anything like that, but I just want to let you know that I do license my music. I think that's really important to me to follow copyright. I'm very passionate about things that are copyrighted and trademarked, especially as an artist myself. So if you want to check out Artlist, there's some really beautiful music over there that you can license for any of your videos or streams or anything that you're interested in producing. Alright, I'm getting a little messy because I'm trying to rush here, but just want to finish off these tiny little details to make myself feel like we're accomplished and finished here. Alright, let me hold this up nice and close to the camera so you can see that. And I will go through all of these trees as well, just so you can get an idea. If you're just joining in, it looks like there's a few people who just joined in kind of close to the end here. So what we did today, if you want to watch the restream, I'll pull this back just a little bit. We focused on realistic trees. We focused on these 4 types. And then we focused on a simplified version of those same trees, and then a stylized, fun version of those trees. So, and then I also earlier got into drawing mountains. We didn't get into inking or painting. That's what we're going to do tonight. I'll be back at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time showing you how to ink these and color these. And then later tonight, same stream, I will be doing some wood burning as well. So if you're interested in any of that, you can join back up later tonight. I've got to run. I've got to go to a doctor's appointment. I hope you found this video helpful. Again, anytime, questions, feel free to ask them. Feel free to reach out to me on any social medias. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate every single person who popped in, said hi, even if it was just for a little bit. I just love seeing you guys' hellos and hanging out with you guys. So thank you so much. Be sure to follow if you're not already, if you want to catch the part 2 of this stream later tonight, or the replay later on in the week. Usually I'm streaming on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays, and then a couple of days in between when I have free time. So that's it for now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful day or night, depending on what